Good evening, my dear students. Welcome to the second session on the indirect tax laws. As you all must have attended the previous session, we discussed the concept of registration, why registration is important in GST. We discussed the provisions of section 22, 23 and 24 of the CGST Act 2017. We discussed the concept of aggregate turnover in detail. What are all to be included in the aggregate turnover? What are all to be excluded in the when calculating the value of the aggregate turnover was what we discussed in the previous session. And also the concept of cases where a person is not liable to be registered under the GST, and also cases where a person is liable to be registered under GST irrespective of whatever be the value of the turnover, right? Please note that the session is particularly for the students who are appearing in the November 2021 examinations and also the May 2022 examinations. So if anyone who is writing in July and who is viewing these classes, my suggestion is these classes will be more in detail. So therefore that is the kind amount of time which you have to spend. So in cases your exam is next month and you should be knowing what is the concept of registration and all those things. Of course you can view for revision purposes, but otherwise the session will be more in detail because it is particularly for the students who are writing in the month of November as well as next year May 2022. So therefore, we stopped at section 24. We also saw the concept of a taxable person. We saw that moment a person is registered, he becomes a taxable person. And also we saw the concept of liable to be registered. That means if a person, the turnover for a person crosses the applicable, the threshold limit, then he becomes liable to be registered. So therefore, even though he does not have a GST registration, he can be considered to be as a taxable person by the GST department. In today's session, we are going to see section 25, which talks about the procedure for registration. What is the procedure which is involved? Some changes had taken place recently where the concept of Aadhaar authentication has been brought into. This happened last year when the application was made for the GST registration. So that will be important from your examination point of view because it is a new process which has been added. So a theory question can be asked from that particular concept. So we will also see what is the other authentication related provisions which have been added. We shall look at that. Then we shall also look at cancellation of registration, suspension of registration, revocation of cancellation of registration. These are all what we are going to cover in today's session. So starting off, we go straight away into the section. Here we come into section 25. Section 25 subsection 1 straight away says that what is the procedure for application for registration and when is the application supposed to be made. So therefore 25 subsection 1, what does it say? Every person who is liable to be registered under 22 or 24, straight away you need to recollect what is 22. 22 is basically whenever the turnover crosses the threshold limit, he has to get himself liable to be, he becomes liable to be registered. Or 24 talks about instances where compulsory GST registration is required, irrespective of the value of the turnover. So therefore, every person who is liable to be registered under section 22 or 24, he shall apply for the registration within 30 days from the date on which he becomes liable to registration. So this is very, very important. So what do you mean by the term, the date on which he becomes liable to registration? When we look at section 22, when we talk about the concept of the date on which he becomes liable to registration is the date on which the turnover crosses the respective threshold limit. That is the date which we have to consider when we say the date on which he becomes liable to be registration. So therefore, within 30 days from that particular date, he has to apply for the registration in such manner and subject to such conditions as may be prescribed. So please make a note. Registration process should be done within 30 days from the date on which he becomes liable to be registered in such manner and such conditions as may be prescribed. Then there is a proviso which is given. It says, again, it talks regarding the casual taxable person and a non-resident taxable person. We shall delve into these concepts in detail today when we talk about casual taxable person and non-resident taxable person. We also covered the concept of casual taxable person in the previous session. So therefore, with regard to that particular person, he shall apply for registration at least 5 days prior to the commencement of the business. So what do you mean by a casual taxable person? Casual taxable person means a person who wants to participate in some temporary business activity in another state. When I say temporary, it can be for 3 days or 5 days or even up to 30 days. So therefore, if, for example, I'm in the state of Delhi and in the state of Rajasthan, there is an exhibition. I'm in the state of Delhi, I'm into a jewelry business, and in Rajasthan, an event manager is organizing an exhibition where sellers from all over India come and participate. In this particular situation, I need to get myself registration as a casual taxable person in the state of Rajasthan. As all of you will remember, in each particular state, if the business is carried on, a registration needs to be taken separately for that particular state. That is a very, very important point. But rather than going for a regular registration in the state of Rajasthan, if this person is going to be only for a temporary amount of time, if he is going to carry on the business only for a temporary amount of time in the state of Rajasthan, then it is always preferable that he goes for a registration as a casual taxable person. So therefore, in case of a casual taxable person, as we saw in section 24, compulsory registration is covered here. So therefore, he has to get himself registered irrespective of the amount of turnover which is supposed to be there. So therefore, in case of a casual taxable person, he has to apply for a registration at least 5 days prior to the commencement of the business. So at least 5 days prior to the commencement of the business, he has to apply for a registration. This is when we talk about the casual taxable person. Now, when I talk about the term non-resident taxable person, this means what? When I talk about a non-resident taxable person, I'm talking about a person who is outside India, but he wants to do some business in India. If any of you have been to Goa, this is basically pre-COVID times. Now you cannot think of traveling for quite a few months. So if any one of you have been to Goa, you have all these markets which are set up in the state of Goa, like a Wednesday market or a Friday market, etc. So therefore, if you go to the market, you'll see a lot of non-resident persons also selling various stuff in the respective market. So the GST law says that if you're a non-resident person, irrespective of your threshold limit, you need to apply for a GST registration. And the concept of registration, if you are a non-resident person, is different. He has to apply at least 5 days prior to the commencement of the business. That is this proviso which speaks about a casual taxable person and a non-resident taxable person. Then there is another proviso which is given. If any person has a unit in a special economic zone. What do you mean by the term special economic zone? In various states, the government, in order to promote exports, may designate certain zones as a special economic zone, wherein the companies from outside India are invited to set up their back offices in that special economic zone. So therefore, this special economic zone is treated as if it is a taxable territory outside India. So therefore, if you are making any transactions with the special economic zone, it is called as a deemed export, wherein it is all the treatment with regard to exports are applicable to such particular transactions. So therefore, if one person is there, he has a regular business. Apart from that, he is also opening a business in a special economic zone. In that particular situation, a separate registration needs to be obtained for the unit which is operating in the special economic zone. That is another proviso which is given, right? This is the proviso. These are the two provisos which are given to 25 subsection 1, which speaks about how a casual taxable person or a non-resident taxable person needs to apply for the registration, and also in case of a unit in a special economic zone, separate registration is required. That was your 25 subsection 1. Moving on, we come to 25 subsection 2, which says, what does 25 subsection 2? A person seeking registration under the Act shall be granted a single registration in a state or union territory, right? Very simple. So therefore, when I am applying for a registration in a state, I will be granted only one single registration for that particular state or union territory. Please bear in mind, if I'm applying for a registration, assuming in the state of Maharashtra, I get a single registration for that particular state. However, there is a proviso which is given. What does the proviso says? In case of multiple business verticals. What do you mean by the term business vertical? A business vertical means a type of business which is different from the regular business which is taken place by that respective person. That is the term multiple business vertical. Business vertical concept is also given in segment reporting in the accounting standard, wherein it clearly mentions what is a business vertical, wherein for each business vertical a separate financial statements are prepared. This is given in the accounting standard which relates to segment reporting, wherein you can see in detail what is the definition of a business vertical. For a limited understanding in GST, we have to consider the term business vertical as a different line of business. For example, I am a taxable person. I am into the retail sale of furniture. I'm into a retail sale of furniture. Now I have started another shop wherein I am into retail sale of textiles. Therefore, retail sale of furniture is separate and retail sale of textiles is separate. So therefore, the law gives me a option that I can register myself separately for each business vertical. So therefore, if I have multiple business verticals in one state, I can get separate registration for each business vertical subject to the conditions as may be prescribed. Right. So therefore, what are the conditions which are prescribed? The business should be totally different. He has to supply, make a separate application for both the registrations. These are all some important aspects which we have to remember whenever we talk about the separate registration for each business vertical. So therefore, the same business vertical definition is given in 2 subsection 18. This definition is totally taken from the accounting standard, which talks about segment reporting. What does it say? It means a distinguishable component of an enterprise. Distinguishable component, that is, you can identify the component as if it is a totally different business than your normal business. So therefore, a distinguishable component which is engaged in the supply of individual goods or services or a group of related goods or services, risks and returns are different from that of the business vertical. So the important aspect which we have to know is, whenever I am categorizing two businesses into two different business verticals, the risks and rewards should be different for the same. Risks, reward, and returns should be different from the same. That is basically a business vertical. What are the various factors which can consider, wherein the for the business vertical is nature of goods and services, production processes, type or class of customers. All these are certain key points for you to determine where the business vertical is separate for each particular business. So that was basically your 25 subsection 2, which speaks about a single registration in each state and also an option to get multiple GST registrations in case of different business verticals. Now let us pause for a moment and see if you have any queries till now, so that we'll take that and move forward. Good evening, Aishwarya. Nice to see you on time. Good evening, sir. Is there a threshold limit for interstate? We had covered this in the previous session. Interstate, always you require a compulsory registration. However, a threshold limit is given for certain notified handicraft goods and goods where craftsmen are involved, right? In that case, there is a threshold limit. Otherwise, there is a no threshold limit for interstate. We have to get a registration done compulsorily. Annapurna, yeah, sir, in case of non-resident taxable, his representative has to take the registration in the name of a non-resident person. No, not necessarily. A non-resident person can get himself registered as well. Yes, a PAN number is a compulsory requisite for the GST registration. However, in case of a non-resident, it is not, they need not have a PAN number. On the basis of his passport and other documents, a GST registration can be brought. Whenever there is a representative here, it is always does not come under this temporary registration. A regular registration is taken because the representative will have all his Indian documents in place. I'm talking about a situation where the non-resident himself is carrying on the business. In that particular situation, it is not a regular registration, but a temporary registration for a limited period of time, right? Basically, the idea is to give the non-resident only in case of a temporary business activity, wherever he comes for a few days or a few months, sells his goods and then goes back to his native country. That is the intention behind giving this non-resident taxable person a registration, which is different from your regular registration. Suyashi, sir, what if the person is having multiple branches of a business in a single state? Whenever there is a multiple branches of a business in a single state, if the business is of the same nature, for example, if he has a furniture shop and he has multiple branches in a state, he need not get himself separate GST registrations as such. One GST registration is sufficient, but when you're applying for the GST registration, you need to mention the place of business. So a principal place of business and various additional places of business of each branch has to be clearly given in the registration application. I hope this point is clear. Bhargavi Maineni. Hi, sir. Good evening. Sir, is that mandatory for different business vertical? There should be different registration? No, it is not mandatory. Why do I say it is not mandatory? If we look at this particular section, what does it say? It says that provided a person having multiple business may be granted a separate registration. The word may is important here. Here the word may is used. That means it is totally at the choice of the respective businessman for the purpose of getting a separate registration for each business vertical. So it is not compulsory. An option is given to the respective taxpayer, right? Also, yeah, so let's go back for any more questions. Sir, in case of e-commerce operator, do a person liable to take registration or not? Now, in your question, are you referring to the e-commerce operator or are you referring to the person who is supplying the goods or services to the e-commerce operator? If it is an e-commerce operator, yes, he has to get himself registered under GST for sure. In case of the persons who is supplying the goods or services through e-commerce operator, then whatever is covered in 9 subsection 5, there are certain categories of services. They need not get themselves registered under the GST. But apart from that, all the others need to get themselves compulsorily registered under GST, irrespective of the turnover. Now, let me give you a disclaimer before proceeding further. There is sudden heavy downpour here. So in case the power shuts off, I'll have to organize for another backup data. So please be ready. In case the power shuts off, there will be a 2-minute break wherein I have to connect to my other hotspot to resume this session. But let's hope the power doesn't go and we continue our class. Yeah, another doubt by Mr. Narayanan. Sir, if a company does taxable supplies in 2 different states, say Maharashtra and Telangana, what will be the limit, 40 lakhs or 20 lakhs for the purpose of registration? We had covered this concept in detail in the previous session. My suggestion is to please go through that video. But still, in order to answer your question, when I'm talking about Maharashtra and Telangana, in case of Telangana, the aggregate threshold limit is 20 lakhs only. It has not been increased to 40 lakhs. So when it is 20 lakhs and I have 2 taxable supplies in 2 different states, Maharashtra, Telangana, then I have to take only 20 lakhs into consideration because the lower limit has to be taken into consideration. This I'm assuming that in your question, you are referring to taxable goods only. Though it is taxable goods, though it is taxable services, in the state of Telangana, the threshold limit continues to remain at 20 lakhs. So I hope this point also is clear, right? Sir, when does such a situation, question by Priyadarshini, when does such a situation for multiple business verticals arise in a practical scenario? There might be multiple situations for this. Let me give you an example. Now, you have a property. You want to give that property on rent, or you have a commercial property subject to GST. And apart from that, you have a business of footwear, or you have some other totally unrelated business. Now, you want to maintain separate books of accounts for both. You don't want to club both of them. Okay, you want to see, for this I have a separate business, this is a different type of business, in this I have sales, purchases, etc. But when it comes to rental income, I have only rental income. I don't have much of input tax credit as such. So I want to split both of this so that I understand what is the GST applicable for what. So therefore, these two are two business verticals. One business is letting out of commercial property, and the second type of business is purchase and sale of footwear. So therefore, in this particular situation is a practical situation where a need for different registrations in different business verticals, different registrations are required. So I hope all these queries are answered. Now we come back to our slide to take you further through this concept of 25 subsection 2. Moving forward, definition of business vertical is done. Now we come to 25 subsection 3, where we speak about the concept of voluntary registration. You see, let me give you a brief history of how this GST registration became something like as if it is a must for every business. When 2017 July, when GST came into existence, right, there was a very, very strong rumor, or there was a very, very strong assumption among the business community that a GST registration is a must. Only if you have a GST registration, you will get big orders. Only if you have GST registration, you will get multiple clients. And transparency is assured whenever there is a GST registration. So that was something which was there in the mindset of the business community. So therefore, everyone started getting themselves registered under GST, even if their turnover was much below the threshold limit of 20 lakhs. Right? But they were not prepared for the monthly compliance, like filing of returns, like they also, another common misconception was, the moment I get myself registered under GST, only if my turnover crosses 20 lakhs, I will be subject to GST. So long as my turnover is below 20 lakhs and I've got myself registered under GST, I don't have to collect any GST. This was one of the common misconceptions which was there. So therefore, people started getting themselves registered under GST without knowing that they are falling into a deep well. Because once you are into GST, you have to do your compliance. You need a tax consultant or a CA to help you with your returns filing. It entails a lot of expenses, etc. So therefore, in this particular situation, 25 subsection 3 was a section which was taken into consideration by a lot of businessmen. So therefore, even though a person who is not liable to be registered under 22 or 24 may get himself registered voluntarily, and all the provisions of the Act as are applicable to a registered person shall apply to such person, right? So therefore, even though you are not liable to be registered under 22, that means even though your turnover is not crossed the respective threshold limit, or under 24, you are not falling into the various categories of persons who require the compulsory registration, still you may get yourself voluntarily registered, and all the provisions of the Act, whichever is applicable to registered person, shall apply to such person. So therefore, once you get yourself registered under voluntary, you have to start with all the respective GST compliance. There are no two ways about that. I hope this point is clear. Now we move on to 25 subsection 4, where we say, this is a very, very interesting section. A concept of distinct person is mentioned here. This distinct person is also covered in various other sections. In concept of supply also, this is referred to. In concept of value of supply also, this is referred to. So therefore, this 25 subsection 4 is very, very interesting. Let us see what exactly does it say. A person who has obtained or is required to obtain more than one registration, whether in one state or union territory, or more than one state or union territory, shall, in respect of such registration, be treated as distinct persons for the purposes of this act. That means what? Now, one person is there. He has obtained more than one registration. He has businesses in more than one state. So therefore, in that particular situation, if he has businesses in more than one state, he has to get himself different GST registration. In one state, another one GST registration is required. Another state, another GST registration is required. So if for this particular situation, he shall be treated as distinct persons. That is, as far as GST concept is concerned, these two registrations, even though it is owned by a single person, they both will be considered to be as a different person. That is a distinct person for the purpose of GST. That is your 25 subsection 4. Right? So 25 subsection 4 speaks about a proprietor. A person who is obtained more than one registration will be a distinct person. Second one, this is basically speaks about an establishment. So therefore, if one person is there, he is opening one establishment in one state. He has another establishment in another state. These two establishments also are to be treated as distinct person. So therefore, 25 subsection 5, what does this say? Where a person who has obtained or is required to obtain registration in a state or union territory in respect of an establishment, he has an establishment in another state or union territory, then such establishment shall be treated as establishments of distinct persons for the purposes of this act, right? So therefore, when establishment is present in two different states, then such establishments shall be treated as establishments of distinct persons for the purposes of this act. So I hope this point is clear with regard to distinct persons, with regard to GST. Now, 25 subsection 6 speaks about the person should have a PAN issued under the Income Tax Act. It's very, very clear. What does this say? It says that every person should have a PAN number which is issued under an Income Tax Act 1961 in order to be eligible for the grant of registration. So therefore, a PAN number is compulsorily required for the purpose of a GST registration. But however, in case of a person who is required to deduct the tax under section 51, instead of a PAN, a TAN number also is sufficient for the purpose of the grant of registration. So therefore, as it's a very, very simple thing here, in case you want to get yourself registered under GST, you need to have a PAN number. But in case of have a PAN number. Similarly, even for a non-resident, this concept was very weird. This was introduced when the first wave of COVID struck our country. And once slowly there was some recoveries happened. I don't know for what reason this this point of other authentication was brought into existence. This is basically in order to if one person does not have an Aadhaar card and is applying for the GST registration, the GST department really wanted to be sure that this person is actually there and is actually conducting a business. That is precisely one of the reasons why this provision was given. But in case that person did not have an Aadhaar card, the rule said that the GST officer had to do a physical verification of the business premises. Physical verification of the business premises after the when the first wave of COVID hit was definitely not a good idea, because of course people had to be indoors and they should have taken necessary precautions. But here the government wants the GST officers to go and personally visit the business premises. Anyways, that was the main logic was to remove all the fake GST registration. That was the main agenda, the main reason why this particular subsections were introduced. So 25(6)(a) is basically the section, and also 6B, 6C, and 6D are also there with regard to this particular point. So 25(6)(a), what does it say? It basically mentions that every person shall undergo an authentication or furnish the proof of possession of an Aadhaar number in such form and manner as may be prescribed. Right? So therefore, everyone will undergo the authentication, or he will furnish the proof that he has an Aadhaar card associated to his name, but also provided the Aadhaar card is not assigned to the registered person, alternate and viable means of identification shall be given to him on the recommendations of the council, as however they may prescribe. So therefore, in case it does not have an Aadhaar number, in that particular situation, alternate means of identification should be given. This is nothing but physical visit to the premises, as what was comprised in the GST rules. In case of a failure to undergo authentication or furnish the proof of possession or any other alternate and viable means, registration shall be deemed to be invalid and other provisions shall apply as if he is does not have a registration. So very, very simple. So therefore, whenever this person does not have an Aadhaar card, right? So therefore, if Aadhaar card is not there, there's no question of Aadhaar authentication. Apart from Aadhaar authentication, other means of authentication also did not happen. In that particular situation, in case the government has already allotted the GST registration to this particular person, it may treat that GST registration as invalid and other provisions will act as if the person does not have the GST registration at all. So this was the concept of Aadhaar authentication, which was recently brought into existence. Then 25(6)(b) again is on the day on and from the date of the notification, every individual shall undergo authentication or furnish the proof of Aadhaar number as such manner as may be prescribed. So therefore 6A was the concept of Aadhaar authentication, whereas 6B says that every individual shall undergo the Aadhaar authentication, right? That is the difference between 6A and 6B. 6E is again very simple. Here they talk about the person other than an individual. So if you are not an individual, if you are a company, if you are a HUF, if you are a partnership firm, in that particular situation, these persons other authentication should be done for the authorized representative of the company. So because if you are a private company and you are applying for the GST registration, the authorized signatory will be any one of the directors of the respective company. So this particular person should go for the Aadhaar authentication. Any one of the authorized representative, any one of the director can be the authorized signatory. He will go for the respective Aadhaar authentication. This is what is given. It's very, very simple under 25 subsection 6C. So therefore, in this particular situation, again, the provision is the same. If these persons Aadhaar authentication does not work for such people, they can go for the alternate and viable means of identification as may be applicable. That is your 25 subsection 6C. 25(6)(d) talks about where the subsections 6A, 6B, and 6C shall not apply. It's very clear the provisions of 6A, 6B, and 6C shall not apply to such classes of the person as the government may specify by way of the notification. Aadhaar number is nothing but the meaning assigned to it under the Aadhaar Act 2016. So these are the new provisions which has been added recently. You can definitely expect a theory question on this. It is a very, very simple provision. There is nothing very complicated to this. We shall also discuss the rules when we are recapitulating the entire section whatsoever. Right? Then, now moving on. 25 subsection 7 speaks about how a non-resident taxable person may be granted the GST registration because he does not have a PAN number. So therefore, 25 subsection 7 says that notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 6, a non-resident taxable person may be granted registration under subsection 1 on the basis of such documents as may be prescribed. So whatever documents he has, like your passport or his whatever the foreign ID proofs, etc., based on that, the GST registration can be given. This is basically 25 subsection 7, which speaks about the documents required for a non-resident for the GST registration. Then 25 subsection 8 speaks about the event when a person fails to obtain registration. He does not obtain registration, what is to be done? So therefore, where a person who is liable to be registered under the Act does not get himself registered, the proper officer may, without prejudice to any other action may be taken, proceed to register such person in manner as may be prescribed. So therefore, if you are liable to be registered, that is, your turnover is crossing the threshold limit or you are covered in section 24 in case of compulsory registration. In that particular situation, if you have not got yourself registered, the respective proper officer may himself proceed and get you registered under the CGST Act in the manner as may be prescribed. That is your 25 subsection 8. In case of your registration is not done, the action, the power is there with the proper officer. in order to get the registration done. 25 subsection 9, notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, a specialized agency of the United Nations or any other consulate or embassies, etc., or such cases, instead of a GST registration number, they will get a unique identity number, which is known as a UIN. So in cases such as the United Nations offices and your embassies, etc., always they might get some incentives with regard to the expenses what they incur and the GST what they pay on the expenses what they incur when they set their offices in India. So therefore, that comes as a benefit for them, and therefore, instead of a GST registration, a unique identification number is given so that they are able to avail the benefits. So that is what is covered under 25 subsection 9. Then 25 subsection 10 speaks about whether the registration or the UIN will be granted or not. It is very, very simple. The registration or the unique identification number will be granted or rejected after due verification in the manner and within such period as may be prescribed. So therefore, in this case, there is a period which is given. We shall look at all that period, etc. What is the number of days which is required for the registration to be given and all of that. It shall be granted or rejected after the due verification. 25 subsection 11, a certificate of registration is given in such form. This is your form GST REG 6. All of you, most of you rather, in your articleship, I hope you have applied for a GST registration. So you must be very familiar with what the process is. The certificate is given in form REG 6, right? So therefore, 25 subsection 11 talks about issuance of certificate. 25 subsection 12 talks about a registration is deemed to have granted after the expiry of the period. So the proper officer always has a period within which he has to approve or reject the GST registration. Now, before the expiry of such period, if he does not take any action, if he just remains silent, then the concept of deemed approval is there, which is covered in 25 subsection 12. So therefore, registration is deemed to have been granted after the expiry of the period given in subsection 10. So what is the period we will see, which is 7 days or 3 days or 21 days as the case may be. We'll see when we discuss that. So therefore, if the officer does not take any action, then registration is deemed to have been granted. That is your 25 subsection 12. 26 talks about the deemed registration. This means what? Therefore, now in GST, if you see, there are different acts. One is the CGST Act and each state is the SGST Act. Now, when you're applying for the registration, it may either go to the state officer or it may go to the central officer, because there are CGST officers and the SGST officer. You see, when before GST was there, all the officers who were in service tax now have become CGST officers. All the officers who are under excise and service tax now have become the CGST officers. Now, all the officers who are under VAT, sales tax, etc., now they have become the SGST officers. So therefore, in this particular situation, when you are applying for the registration, the department segregates your application, saying that whether it has to go to the state or whether it has to go to the center. So irrespective of wherever it goes, the registration under any one act, either the state act or the Union Territory Act, is nothing but deemed to be grant of registration under the CGST Act also. That is what is covered here. So any registration or UIN number which is given under the State Goods and Services Act is deemed to be a grant of registration, or the UIN under the Act is subject to the condition that the application has not been rejected within the time period. So therefore, whichever registration is granted, if a registration is granted under the State Act, it is as if it is given under the Central Act only. Similarly, if any rejection is happening of the application of registration under the state GST, it will be deemed to be a rejection of the application for registration under this Act. That is the concept of deemed registration, which is given in section 26. I hope this point also is clear. Before we move on, let me see if there are any queries. Then accordingly, we'll take it forward. sir, for what purpose is Annapurna? For what purpose is distinct person considered? Because while calculating, we'll consider the turnover of all the states. So, in what context are we taking the distinct person? Very good doubt, Annapurna. See, distinct person, why it is important is when let me just go to value of supply for some time. When we look at the term value of supply under GST, right? Whenever there is a transaction between two distinct persons, whatever transaction value is there, you cannot take that to be as the value of the supply. You have to take the open market value as the value of the supply. Because if you are two distinct persons, if you have an office in one state, if you have office in another state, now if there is a transaction between both of you, obviously it will not be as per the market value. So therefore, value of supply says that in case of distinct persons, when you are valuing the supply, you need to consider the open market value of supply as the value of the supply. So that is why the distinct person is important here. Distinct person is not relevant for the turnover, because turnover anyways, if there are two offices in one state, if it's crossing, then the other state also liable for registration. Very simple. But this distinct person is there because it impacts other areas of the GST, such as determining the value of the supply, etc. So therefore, that is why this distinct person is important. So therefore, in that context only, the distinct person is important. So when the person is distinct, then he has multiple registrations in different states. Assuming this explanation of distinct person was not there, it was as if the transactions between the same person in two different states, it will be for him also, it will be the considered to be as a transaction value. Whatever value he is doing, the government would have accepted that as the GST value, but that is not the case here. So that is precisely why the distinct person concept is given, so that other areas such as value of supply, etc., can be considered as the open market value. Needs to be considered whenever there is a transaction between the distinct persons. When you are studying the value of supply related provisions, this point will be more clear. Why chat box is not enabled for my login by Kantimati? Madam, this is something what the technical team needs to help. I request, if the technical team is on board, request to please help Kantimati, because she's not able to access the chat box. The moment you are a CA, you slowly become all the more non-technical, and all these computer related stuff is suddenly appears Greek and Latin. But however, the coming the past 1 year especially has taught many chartered accountants in our country that concept of work from home has become all the more important, and you need to develop proper technical capabilities if you want to do the work as a chartered accountant in the post-COVID era. It is not so simple as the pre-COVID era. So yes, we have to become more technically relevant, which is very important for us. Now, we come back to section the presentation. Here we look at the provisions relating to casual taxable person and non-resident casual taxable person. I hope all of you please remember what is casual taxable person. Don't write things like in the exam if you don't know the answer. Don't write a person who wants to casually do business is a casual taxable person. Don't write all such answers if you don't know it in the examination. Please be very careful. So therefore, let us see what are the provisions which are given in sections 27 with regard to a casual taxable person and a non-resident taxable person. 27 subsection 1. The certificate of registration issued to casual taxable person or a non-resident taxable person shall be valid for the period specified in the application for registration or 90 days from the effective date of registration, whichever is earlier. So how does this casual taxable person registration work? So first of all, what he has to do, he has to apply for this registration. In that, he has to clearly mention what is the time period for which he wants the registration. For example, he's going and participating in an exhibition is being held for 1 week. So that in that particular situation, the registration period also will be 1 week. The registration period is 30 days, means the registration period will be 30 days. So therefore, the certificate of registration will be valid for whatever period is mentioned in the application for registration. So in the application for registration, if it is mentioned as 30 days, it is valid for 30 days, or 90 days from the effective date of registration, whichever is earlier. So in case this person is mentioning 120 days in the application for registration, we have to take 90 days into consideration. That is what is given in the section, whichever is earlier. And such person shall make the taxable supplies only after issue of the certificate of registration. Certificate of registration needs to be given, only then he can make the taxable supplies. This is with regard to casual taxable or non-resident person. But however, there is also a provision which is given: on sufficient cause being shown, the extent of the 90 days period can be further extended by another 90 days, not exceeding 90 days. So therefore, the facility is also given to the casual taxable person or a non-resident taxable person, where if you are showing sufficient cause that you want the extension of the registration in that particular situation, you can extend it for a period, but that further period should not exceed 90 days. That is your 27 subsection 1, which speaks about the concept of registration of the casual taxable person or the non-resident taxable person. 27 subsection 2 speaks about the casual taxable person. What is another important point which is required? He needs to make an advance deposit of tax. This is not there in your regular GST registration concept. If you are a casual taxable person or if you are a non-resident taxable person, you need to make an advance deposit of tax. You need to estimate your tax liability. You need to calculate your tax liability. According to that, you need to make an advance deposit of tax, right? In case you are extending the registration of the casual taxable person, you need to make a further additional amount deposit has to be done. The amount whatever you are depositing should be credited to the electronic cash ledger, shall be utilized in the manner provided under section 49. So therefore, in the concept, in the chapter of payment of tax, you will see the different types of ledgers which are given: electronic cash ledger, electronic credit ledger, as well as your electronic liability ledger. So therefore, if you are making any payment, it will go and sit in your electronic cash ledger. It is like a GST wallet, which is maintained by the respective registered person. So therefore, this amount, whatever you are depositing, when you are making this advance deposit, it will be get credited to the electronic cash ledger of that person. And utilization, that is utilization of that amount, is as per section 49. Section 49 talks about payment of tax and how the credits and GST needs to be utilized. So but the manner whatever is given in section 49, it has to be utilized. That is your 27 subsection, right? So therefore, that was the provisions of 25, 26 and 27. Let us go through the various important points what we covered in this before we move ahead to the next section. So therefore, the procedure is governed under section 25, read with chapter 3. Special provisions also have been given for casual taxable person registration and non-resident taxable person. Concept of deemed registration also has been elaborated under section 26. gst.gov.in is the respective portal. In this portal, the registration can be submitted electronically. So the verification and the signature can be done either through EVC, that is electronic verification code. That is, whenever you are submitting the application for registration, you need to give your mobile number and email ID of the respective taxable person. So when the registration application is submitted, the EVC goes to the respective mobile number of that person, and that is typed in, and the GST application is submitted. It can be done either through the EVC or also through the digital signature of the respective person. Practically, I have seen multiple chartered accountants or tax consultants. What they do is they give their own mobile number and email ID when they are doing a GST registration for their client. I would suggest this is not at all a good practice. It throws the chartered accountants in the bad light, because they give their own mobile number. So future any notices, etc. is given, it goes to the email ID of the CA and all of that. So I suggest, in case you later, once you all become bright chartered accountants and you're practicing and GST is your core area, when you're helping in the GST registration, please don't give your email ID and mobile number. The mobile number and email ID of the respective customer or client only has to be given. right? So either through EVC or through digital signature, the registration can be submitted. Therefore, where and when person who is liable to be registered on 25, he shall apply in every state or UT wherever he is liable within 30 days from the date on which he becomes liable to registration. So therefore, whenever a person becomes liable for registration, within 30 days from that particular date, he shall apply, and in each state, he shall apply for the respective GST registration on your union territory for that matter. Similarly, a casual taxable person or a non-resident person, she at least 5 days prior to the commencement of the business. So these are all the timelines which you have to remember. Person liable to be registered within 30 days from the date on which he becomes liable to registration, he should register. And second one, casual taxable person or non-resident taxable person, at least 5 days prior to the commencement of business, he has to apply for the registration. Right? Then sometimes the persons in the territorial waters, that is in the sea waters, etc., the business, he might supply something on the ship, etc., when the ship is traveling from one place to the other. So a person who is making a supply in the territorial waters, how, in which state he will fall, you have to see the state or union territory, whichever is wherever the nearest point of the baseline is located, where the baseline of the respective Indian map is located, nearest state to the waters, that has to be considered. Within 30 days from where he becomes liable for registration, he has to apply to that particular state. Example, Sugam Services is engaged in taxable services, taxable supply of services in Madhya Pradesh. Turnover exceeded 20 lakhs on 1st November. So whenever the turnover exceeded 20 lakhs, within 30 days, he has to get himself registered. So by 1st December, the registration has to be done. Then other points, state-wise registration is contemplated in GST. One registration for one state is required. So in case in one state there are different business verticals, option is given to the respective taxpayer for obtaining different GST registrations for each business vertical. In case of registration under composition levy, this is a very, very interesting point. First of all, what is composition levy? Composition levy is covered in section 10 of the CGST Act 2017. This comes in your chapter charge of GST in your respective study material. So in case of a composition levy, it is a simplified form of registration wherein a person, instead of collecting the GST from their customers, pays the GST on his own at a smaller percentage of the turnover. It can be 1%, 2%, etc., as may be specified in the Act. Please bear in mind, a person opting for composition levy cannot claim any input tax credit. That also is clearly given. So therefore, here this particular section deals with a situation wherein there are two business verticals of the taxable person. If one business vertical is registered under the regular registration, then if this person is opening another business, that person shall not be granted registration under the composition scheme. I hope this point is clear. For example, I am a businessman. The same example, let us take. I have a commercial property on which I am getting the rent. Apart from that, I have a shop wherein I sell the footwear. Now, this commercial property rent, I have taken a regular GST registration. But for footwear, I want to get myself registered under composition levy. That is not possible because same person, different business verticals. One vertical is under regular, means the other vertical also should be under regular. It cannot be under the composition levy. Right. Then also, if one business vertical becomes ineligible to pay under composition levy, all the other business verticals will also be ineligible. So different business verticals can be opened by the respective taxable person, and all the business verticals also can be registered under composition scheme. But please bear in mind, if one business vertical becomes ineligible for composition levy, all the others also will become ineligible. This is the point which is to be understood, right? Then let us take an example here. Meetha Lal and Sons, a supplier in Maharashtra, has 3 branches in Mumbai, Pune, Mahabaleshwar. Mumbai and Pune branches are engaged in the supply of garments, and Mahabaleshwar is engaged in the supply of shoes. Either one single registration from Maharashtra can be obtained here, right? So if you see, Mumbai, Pune, Maharashtra are all located in Maharashtra. Mumbai, Pune, and Mahabaleshwar are all located in Maharashtra only. So therefore, in this case, even though the different type of business is there, single registration he can obtain. He can show any of the branch as the principal place of business. PPOB means principal place of business, and other two branches can be APOB, that is additional place of business. Or instead, we can also obtain for separate GST registration for each of the branches, right? So therefore, in this particular situation, if Meetalal opts to have separate registration for 3 branches, sends some garments for sale to the Pune branch, then Mumbai branch should raise a tax invoice and pay the tax on the transfer of garments to the Pune branch. So therefore, even though different registrations are there, in case the garments are sold to the respective Pune branch, if the Mumbai branch is sending some garments, a tax invoice has to be raised. Why? Because different GST registrations are there in this particular point. I hope this example also is clear. Voluntary registration, as we saw, that all the provisions as applicable to registered person shall also apply to the voluntarily registered person. Once registered voluntarily, tax has to be collected. There is no way of any escape. You cannot say, sir, turnover is less than 20 lakhs, why I should collect? All that logics are not acceptable. And also, PAN is a must, apart but in case of a non-resident taxable person, other documents like passport, etc., can be considered for the purpose of giving the registration. Then unique identity number, which is given for certain specific cases like your United Nations organizations and your embassies and consulates, etc. Why the UIN is needed? Because for claiming the refund of taxes which are paid on notified supplies of goods. For that purpose, UIN is given. Application to be filed in the prescribed form. UIN will be assigned after seeing the application and getting a recommendation from the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. Registration certificate within 3 days from the date of submission of the application needs to be given. That is your concept of unique identification number. Suo motu registration by the proper officer. When I say suo motu, it means on his own. That is, on his own, the proper officer gets the person registered under GST. So wherever pursuant to any survey, inquiry, inspection, search, etc., the proper officer has come to know that the person who is liable to registration has not applied for the registration, he will register that person on a temporary basis and issue the order in the prescribed form. So in case he has issued some other notice and a survey has happened, inquiry has happened, inspection, etc. has happened, he has seen that this person, though is liable to get registered under GST, has not got himself registered, then the officer will register that person on a temporary basis and issue the order in the prescribed form. So once this temporary registration is done, the person can either supply the person can accept, saying that okay, I am liable to be registered. I will submit an application for registration within 90 days from the date of grant of the temporary registration. Or if that person feels that no, this temporary registration is invalid, I need not get myself registered at all, he can also file an appeal against the temporary registration. This is the process which is to be carried out. Then once the appeal is filed, in case the taxpayer disagrees to the temporary registration and he files an appeal saying that I don't need to get registered, but still this person has temporarily registered me, he can file an appeal. Then if the appellate authority upholds the liability, if it says that yes, you have to be registered within 30 days from date of order of the appellate authority. So whenever the appellate authority gives an order saying that you have to get yourself registered within 30 days from the date of such order, the application for registration can be filed. Right. Apart from that, how to submit, verification, issue of registration certificate, all these provisions are exactly the same. Mutatis mutandis, it shall apply to such application submitted by the person granting the temporary registration. Then the GST number will be given. Effective date is very important. The GST number, whichever is granted, will be effective from the date of order of the proper officer giving the temporary registration. First, the proper officer will give the temporary registration. From that date itself, the GST registration will be effective. That is an important point which you have to remember. So therefore, from that date itself, whatever supplies are made, the person is responsible for collecting the taxes. Right. So I hope these points are clear. Before we move forward, let me again see if we have any queries so that accordingly we can. Sir, awesome lecture for you. Will you be teaching us entire ID? Thank you very much for your kind words, Mr. Narayanan. But I'll be, since this live classes, whatever is given, I'll be teaching the topics which is assigned to me. But please don't worry. All other faculties are excellent in their subject of IDT. All the other topics also will be dealt beautifully by the subject matter experts. So please don't worry about that. You will have a good experience with all the other faculties as well. 25 subsection 5. Please repeat. Let us go back to 25 subsection 5 as Annapurna madam wants me to repeat the same. No issue. We will do that. 25 subsection 5 basically talks about your distinct person. As I told you, what is a distinct person? A distinct person is someone, in case you are one person and you have your offices in two different states, then you have to get yourself registered in two different states. The moment you get yourself registered in two different states, you have two separate GST registration numbers. So these two different GST registration numbers are treated as a distinct person. So what does this 25 subsection 5 says? It says that where a person who has obtained or is required to obtain the registration in respect of an establishment. So if you have a company, you have opened a company in one state, you open another company in another state, right? Then such establishments. So these two companies are to be treated as establishments of distinct persons. So when I say distinct persons, it is somewhat like related persons only. Just assume it is related persons. If a company has a branch office in another state, this company and the office in another state, these both are related persons, or these both are distinct persons. It is as simple as that. So therefore, establishments of a distinct person. Why this section is given? Because the moment there are distinct persons, there assumes a character of relation. So this clarification is given by 25 subsection 5. That means if one person has two GST registrations in two different states, that means they will be distinct persons. Those are different persons, but at the same time, they are related persons because one person owns both the establishments. That is the objective behind this particular section. So I hope it is clear now. So any further queries before we move forward? Yeah, so I think that's about it. Yeah, so where were we? Yeah, I think we have covered all of this. So yeah, I think we came till this suo motu registration by the proper officer. Yeah, now this procedure for registration, the detailed procedure as to how you have to apply, what are the documents which are required, these are all covered in rules 8, 9, 10 of the CGST rules. See, rules as such are not very important from exam point of view, but it is better to have a understanding of that because some theory question may come up with regard to the respective rules. So this section 25 and these rules have to be read together for the proper understanding. But whatever procedure is given here will not apply to non-resident taxable person, tax deductor under section 51, tax collector under 52, and supplier of OIDR services. Please remember that the registration procedure for non-resident taxable person, tax deductor under section 51 of CGST, tax collector under section 52 of CGST, supplier of OIDR services, in these four situations, the procedure is different from your regular GST registration procedure. So therefore, this standard procedure will not apply to these four cases. The same procedure which is given in rule number 8, 9, and 10 are also applicable to person who is paying the tax under the composition levy. If someone wants to apply for the composition scheme, For him also the same rules 8, 9 and 10 will be applicable. And also every person seeking the voluntary registration for that person 25 subsection 3, where a person wants to get himself registered voluntarily, to him also the same rule will apply. And also for casual taxable person, the same rule will apply. So I hope this point is clear, right? And the cess, as I told you before, in a person having a cess unit or a special economic zone developer, in case if he has any other units outside the special economic zone, with regard to the unit which is there in the special economic zone, he has to make a separate application for that as a different business vertical. So I hope these points are clear. Then we talk about application of registration by input service distributor. This input service distributor we already covered in the previous session. In very simple terms, input service distributor means a person, in case of a company who has multiple GST registrations in multiple states and it has common input tax credit, this company needs to take a separate registration as an ISD, that is input service distributor registration. What this ISD will do is calculate the common input tax credit and distribute it across all the respective states. This is what is done by the input service distributor. So in this particular situation also, separate application for registration has to be made. Again, for registration as an input service distributor, there is no threshold limit. Irrespective of any threshold limit, you have to apply for registration as an input service distributor. And then this GST registration, for people who are not very IT savvy, who are not very tech savvy, various facilitation centers are also established where the taxpayer can go to that center and submit the application for amendment, cancellation, revocation of cancellation. All these facilitation center will be responsible for uploading of the respective forms and documents. So if you look at a stepwise thing for the procedure, first one, whoever is wanting to get registered or whoever wants to get himself voluntarily registered, first he will have to enter his PAN number, mobile number and email ID in part A of the form GST REG1. So REG1 is the form which talks about the application for registration. In that part A, first you need to enter the mobile number, your email ID and your PAN number. Then OTP gets triggered to the PAN number, to the mobile number and the email ID. You need to enter the OTPs. Then step 3, a TRN gets generated. This TRN is communicated via email and also via mobile to the respective applicant. Once the TRN is generated, the applicant shall electronically submit the application in part B of the application form. Once TRN is generated, within 15 days, you are supposed to attach all the respective documents and submit this part B. When you are submitting this part B only, the new process which has come is Aadhaar authentication. This Aadhaar authentication process is very, very important. For this, one thing you have to remember, your Aadhaar number should be linked to your mobile number. This is one important thing. Many people have Aadhaar card, but it is not linked to the mobile number, because of which the OTP will not get generated. So therefore, Aadhaar authentication process will happen when part B of the application form is being filled. Once receipt of the application, an acknowledgement in the prescribed form, ARN number is generated for the regular person who is opting for regular registration. In case of casual taxable person, he will get the TRN for making advance tax. He has to make an advance deposit of tax. After he makes the advance tax, only the ARN, that is acknowledgement reference number, is generated for the purpose of the GST registration. Then using the TRN, all the prescribed documents will be filed in part B. What are the documents which are asked? The Aadhaar card of the person, the latest electricity bill evidencing the registered office address, and also the rental agreement in case you are staying in a premises which is totally different. All these bank statement also needs to be attached, but now the bank statement can be attached after the GST certificate also is given. That flexibility also is given now as of so. Then this application will be forwarded to the proper officer. All these documents will be verified by the proper officer. In case it is fine, he will give the registration within 3 working days of the submission of the application. Please remember, these 3 working days is applicable only when the Aadhaar authentication is done by the respective person. If Aadhaar authentication is not done, then 3 days is not the time limit for the officer to approve the registration. So therefore, in this case, if he finds that all the documents are correct and everything is proper, then he can issue the GST certificate within 3 days. If he is not satisfied with the documents, within 3 days, he has to issue a notice seeking clarification of documents. For example, if he's not satisfied with the electricity bill which is attached, the electricity bill is of a previous, some last year 2017 date, but you are applying for the registration in 2021. So he can ask you to give the latest electricity bill. Similarly, if he has some other issue, he can issue a notice for clarification. This also should be done within 3 days, right? So therefore, within 3 days, he has to issue the notice seeking the clarification. In case the person does not undergo Aadhaar authentication, then this 3 days become 21 days. So in case Aadhaar authentication is not done, within 21 days, he can issue the registration certificate, or if he's not satisfied, he can issue the clarifications within 21 days. Then this clarification has to be given by the applicant within 7 working days. If satisfied, the registration certificate will be granted, else it will be rejected. So this is the timeline within which the procedure for registration is required. Clarification can be anything, modification of particular, some wrong entering, some wrong mobile number, it can be anything as such. The clarifications can be asked for that. Then the concept of deemed approval is there. That is, the emphasis is given on the proper officer to approve the GST registration within the time limit which is given. If it does not approve the GST registration within the time limit which is given, the GST registration will be deemed to be approved. But however, during the COVID time, internal instructions where notifications were issued wherein the number of days this provision was not applicable, because at that point of time the country was under lockdown. So therefore, in this particular situation, if the proper officer fails to take any action within the stipulated time, the application shall be deemed to have been approved. When he undergoes authentication of the Aadhaar number, or Aadhaar authentication is not required for him, within a period of 3 days, he has to, if the proper officer fails to take action within 3 days, it shall be deemed to have been approved. Where he fails to undergo the Aadhaar authentication or does not opt for it within a period of 21 days from the date of submission of application, he can get himself it is deemed to be approved. So very simple. When I'm applying for the registration and I've done the process of Aadhaar authentication, then within 3 working days, I have to get the GST certificate. Within 3 working days, if it does not do anything, that means it is deemed to be approved. I have not undergone the Aadhaar authentication, he has to give the GST certificate within 21 days. If he does not give within 25 days, that means it is deemed to be approved. So this is the concept of deemed approval. Similarly, notice is given to the applicant to the clarifications. He issues the notice for seeking the clarification. Applicant has to give within 7 days. So within 7 days, applicant has to give. Once he gets the clarification, within 7 days from the date of receipt of clarification from the taxpayer, he has to give the approval or rejection of the registration. If he fails to take any action, within 7 days from the date of receipt of clarification, the registration shall be deemed to be approved. That is the concept of deemed approval which is there under the GST. Let us again throw some light on this Aadhaar authentication. This Aadhaar authentication is a new concept. Why this has come? Because people just took the GST registration for namesake, dummy GST registrations, for issuing the fake invoices. For all this proper tracking, the government felt it is better that an Aadhaar authentication also is done. 21st August 2020 was the date from which Aadhaar authentication became mandatory. But the irony was this came after the first wave of COVID, where the Aadhaar was not there. The GST officer had to risk going and personally visiting the business premises of the taxable person. I somehow was not very happy with this move by the government, because at a time where physical meetings were discouraged, the government itself, through its notification, in case of the Aadhaar not being there, put the officers, the lives of the officers at risk by asking them to personally visit the business premises, because no one can be sure whether the business premises, whether the businessman is taking proper precautions, etc. But that was what? Because the government wanted all the fake GST certificates to disappear. So therefore, this Aadhaar authentication process was done. So therefore, the third point, if you see here, whoever does not provide the Aadhaar, they will be subject to site verification by the tax department. Therefore, based on the documents produced, she can grant the registration. So who is the person required to go for Aadhaar authentication? In case of a new applicant, a person who is first time applying for the GST registration, he can go for the Aadhaar authentication. The date of submission of the application shall be the date of authentication of the Aadhaar number, or within 15 days from the submission of application in Part B of RAG1 form. Persons who are already registered also should go should get the Aadhaar authentication done. So if you are a registered person under GST, you need to log into your GST website, log into your GST portal, and make sure you get your Aadhaar authentication done. So who are the persons who are exempt from Aadhaar authentication? A person who is not a citizen of India, because he will obviously not have an Aadhaar card, so no question of Aadhaar authentication. Then a class of person other than the following: individual, authorized signatory, managing an authorized partner, karta of HUF. Apart from these four, all the other class of persons. If, for example, a company has 2 directors, only one can be sufficient for the purpose of Aadhaar authentication. Both are not required. That exactly is the what is the process? Once you submit the registration application, the GST system will send a link to the GST registered mobile numbers for the Aadhaar authentication. Once you click the verification, window will open. After you enter the OTP, it will straight away get itself linked. The taxpayers also need to complete the Aadhaar authentication for all the promoters, partners, etc. Then after authentication, the demographic data is taken from the Aadhaar card to the respective GST system. Then this earlier, when GST registration was required, the bank account statement, that is the bank statement, had to be compulsorily attached whenever I was submitting the application for the GST registration. But however, now what has happened, this rule has relaxed a bit. In this particular situation, he can furnish the information later also. But within 45 days from the date of registration, you have to attach the bank account statement as well. That is a relaxation which is given by the government. However, this relaxation is not available to persons who have granted registration at TDS or a TCS collector. They are mandatorily, if the TDS or registration as a tax collector or a tax deductor, you need to compulsorily attach your bank statement. So wherever physical verification, a proper officer is satisfied for that physical verification is required, he can go and verify the place of business. Verification report, photographs, etc. should be posted on the common portal within 15 days following the date of such verification. This physical verification definitely is a very cumbersome process, because there may be many people who are service providers, like a chartered accountant working from home. He will have a registered office as his house address, but assuming his Aadhaar is not, he's not able to do his Aadhaar authentication for some reason, this proper officer will land up at the residence of the chartered accountant after 2020 August, which is a very, very ripe time for COVID to get affected. So therefore, these are all the various risks associated with this physical verification process. Then registration certificate is given, as we see. Form GST REG 06 is the form where the GST certificate is given. This is made available to the applicant on the common portal. GST registration number is also communicated. So email will come. The email will have a provisional user ID and a provisional password. And this particular, using the provisional ID and password, regular GST user ID and password can be created, and the GST certificate can be downloaded. This GST certificate is to be digitally signed by the proper officer. This is the format in which the GSTIN is given. First 2 digits are the state code. State code means each particular state has a state code. Telangana has 36, Andhra has 37, and as such, various other states has different state codes. Then the PAN number of the respective person is given for the other digits. Then entity code is given, which is 1 or 2 as the case may be, and the check digit is there at the later. So this check digit is basically a randomly allotted alphabet with regard to the GST registration. Of course, now The government has also provided a facility for you to verify the GST number. For example, if you go to a restaurant and you're having lunch or dinner and you pay some amount, the restaurant charges 5% GST from you. Please note down the GST number of the restaurant and verify it online whether it is of the same restaurant. You can go to Google and verify any GST number what you want. You just need to type verify GST IN. You can enter the GST number and verify whether whoever's GST number that is. Right? Effective date of registration is the date on which the person becomes liable to registration within 30 days, as we already saw. Where it is submitted after 30 days, the effective date shall be the date of grant of registration. So therefore, in case of a person who is liable for registration, the effective date will be within 30 days from such date on which he becomes liable. Where the application only is submitted after 30 days, then effective date shall be the grant of the GST registration. Few other rules: display of registration and GST number on the name board. On the name board, the respective GST number and the registration certificate has to be mentioned at a prominent location. In the principal place of business and additional place of business, in both the places of business, he has to display the registration certificate. Further, GSTN number also has to be given on the name board of such places of business. Effective date of registration: where applicant submits the application within 30 days from when he is liable for registration, the date on which he becomes liable is the effective date. Where he submits after 30 days, the date of grant of registration is the effective date of registration. Now, let us please try to answer this question. Sugam Services is engaged in taxable value of MP. The turnover exceeds 20 lakhs on 1st November. It is liable to be registered by 1st December. It applies for registration on 28th November, granted registration certificate on 5th December. What is the effective date of registration? Here, what is happening? The turnover exceeded 20 lakhs on 1st November. So therefore, date on which he is liable to get registered, he has to apply for registration by 1st December, that is 30 days. He has applied on 28th November and is granted registration certificate on 5th December. What is the effective date of registration in this case? In second case, will your answer differ? If Sugam Services applies for registration on 3rd December and is granted the registration certificate on 10th December, please try to answer this question. So are these procedures important in exam point of view? Not really. When we are talking about the process of registration, it's not very important from exam point of view. But some theory or multiple choice questions for very few marks can be asked. So it is better you just have a brief run through of the respective concept. So it is always better you do that. But procedure wise, always it is in the history of the CA examination, procedures as such, that is rules, when it comes to income tax rules or GST rules, are not very frequently asked. Yeah, so therefore, in this case, in the first situation, within 30 days, the application is given. So therefore, when the application is done within 30 days, the effective date of registration is the date on which he becomes liable for registration. So therefore, date on which he becomes liable for registration is 1st November because it is taxable supply of services. Madhya Pradesh state, more than 20 lakhs, he has to get himself registered. So first case, effective date of registration is 1st November, the date on which he becomes liable for registration. The second case, the registration is applied on 3rd December and certificate is granted on 10th December. In this case, he has applied after 30 days from the date on which he becomes liable for registration. So therefore, in this particular situation, the date of certificate, that is 10th December, will be the respective effective date of registration. Date of grant of registration is the effective date of registration, not the date on which he applies. So 10th December will be the effective date of registration, right? So I hope this point also is clear. What is the concept of effective date of registration, right? So again, so 25 and 27, rules 13 and 15, special provisions for grant of registration in case of a casual and non-resident taxable person. So as we discussed before also, a casual taxable person means a person who occasionally undertakes the transactions involving supply of goods or services in the course of business in the state where he has no fixed place of business. So main test to identify whether he is a casual taxable person is we have to see whether he has a fixed place of business in any state. If he does not have any fixed state of business, that means he can be considered as a casual taxable person. Similarly, non-resident taxable person occasionally undertakes, whether as principal, but has no fixed place of business or residence in India. In case of a non-resident taxable person, that is the criteria which we have to see. So therefore, when does a casual taxable person otherwise arise? Where he has a registered business in one state, but he wants to do some supplies from some other state where he does not have any fixed place of business. In that particular situation, such person has to register in the state from where he seeks to supply as a casual taxable person. So need not have a fixed place of business, but he has to fixed place of business in that state is a casual taxable person, but non-resident taxable person should not have place of residence or business in India. Then he can get himself registered as a non-resident taxable person. Again, what is the timeline? At least 5 days prior to the commencement of the business, compulsory registration has to be done. Every person should have a PAN, but in case of non-resident taxable person, no need of having any PAN number. What he has to submit? Self-attested copy of his valid passport along with the application signed by the authorized signatory who is an Indian resident. So therefore, in case he is filing an application for registration, he can also have an authorized signatory who is an Indian having the valid PAN number. In case of a business entity, application should be filed along with the tax identification or unique number. So therefore, business outside India, whatever tax number is there, with that it can be filed. Please remember, the format for application of registration for casual taxable person is the same as the regular person, that is form REG 01, whereas in non-resident taxable person, it is a different form. Period of validity of the registration is the period which is given in the registration application or 90 days from the effective date of registration. Further extension for a period not exceeding 90 days can be done in case the request is made by the respective casual taxable person. There is a clarification which was given by a circular in 2018 with regard to long-running exhibitions. Now, just because this person has the benefit of a casual taxable person, he cannot go on carrying, go on being outside and taking registration under a casual taxable person. That is why this clarification was issued. In case of long-running exhibitions, that is more than 180 days, more than 6 months, if there is any long-running exhibition, such person cannot be treated as a casual taxable person, and he has to get himself registered as a normal person. When you are going as a normal person, copy of allotment letter is required, because in case you want a normal registration in any other state, the important point is getting an address proof. Like you need to have a proper rental agreement and you need to have proper electricity bill. But in this case, since he is only there for long running exhibition, he can attach the allotment letter granting him the permission, it will be treated as the proof for the place of the business. And also in such cases, he will not be required to pay any advance tax. Whereas regular casual taxable person, he has to estimate the tax liability and make an advance deposit of tax. But in such cases, long running exhibitions where he is going taking a registration as a normal person, there he need not pay any advance amount of tax which is there. Then also, as we discussed in the previous class, the tax deductor under section 51, where government undertakings are there who usually deduct the tax at source, and also e-commerce operators under section 52 who collect the tax at source. The rule 12 specifies the procedure for registration. Again, the form for this is different than a regular REG1 form. Whenever you submit all the application, within 3 working days, the registration will be granted. Again, registration shall be cancelled if is satisfied the person is no longer liable to deduct the tax or collect the tax at source. Cancellation will be communicated electronically, and all the procedure for cancellation of registration shall be followed by the respective officer. Rule 14 talks about the registration of a supplier who is providing the OIDAR services. OIDAR services, as we discussed again in the previous session, online information database access and retrieval services. This is which is provided by a non-resident person to an unregistered Indian recipient. Example, as I told you last time, is a download of some Adobe softwares or any other softwares for that matter. The application for registration in different prescribed form is there. Registration will be granted as may be notified by the government and the council. So this was your procedure of registration in detail in various particular situations. Now, before we go to section 28, amendment of registration, section 29, cancellation of registration, and section 30, revocation of cancellation, let us take a small break. Before that, let me see if there are any queries. We answer that and then we take a break. Sir, if effective registration is 10th December in second case, is not the government losing tax for the period 1st November to 10th because he is liable to registration from 1st November itself? Very much you are right. Very much you are right, because in this particular situation, the effective date of registration is definitely later. The government is losing the tax for that, but the government also has a power to treat him as a taxable person. The government can treat him as a taxable person and can issue the demand on him. There is no point of that. Here we are only talking about the effective date of registration for the purpose of this person filing his returns. But if he is liable to be registered, he automatically becomes a taxable person by virtue of 2 subsection 107. So therefore, definitely he can be proceeded against by the respective tax authority. So that option is anyways there by the tax authority here. So here we break for 10 minutes. Now it is 7:32 by my clock. We resume sharp in 10 minutes and we cover the concepts of cancellation, revocation of cancellation, and amendment of registration, post which we'll also work out some questions and some MCQs. Thank you very much. See you in 10 minutes. Yeah, welcome back, everyone. So, continuing, we go to section 28, which speaks about amendment of registration. Now, whenever you're filing for the application for the GST registration, there can be a lot of changes which is done to the entity. For example, some partners may retire, then some new partners may be added. You may change your email ID, you may change your mobile number, you may change the address of the entity. So like this, multiple changes can happen. So therefore, section 28 speaks about how to apply for, how to make amendment in the registration. That is what is given in section 28. 28 subsection 1 says that every registered person and a person to whom a unique identity number or UIN has been assigned, he shall inform the proper officer of the changes which is done in the information furnished at the time of registration in such form and manner and within such period as may be prescribed. This is given in 28 subsection 1. 28 subsection 2, the proper officer may, on the basis of information which is given, he may either approve or reject the amendments in manner and such period as may be prescribed. However, the approval shall not be required in related to such particulars as may be prescribed. See, when amendment happens, there are two different types of amendments: amendments of core fields and amendments of non-core fields. So these are separately given. In case of amendment of non-core fields, approval of the proper officer is not required, but amendment of core fields, wherein important things like change in partner, etc., the approval of the officer will be required. And also, rejection shall not happen without following the principles of natural justice. So an opportunity of being heard has to be given to the respective person before you are rejecting an amendment for registration. Similarly, any rejection or any approval of amendments under the SGST Act will be treated as the rejection or approval under the CGST Act. So therefore, it is one and the same, and which shall be treated for this one. Then the amendment can be in core or non-core fields. As I told you, in a core field, the approval of the proper officer is required. In case of a non-core field, there is no question of any approval which is required. But practically what we have seen when we are filing for amendments for registration is that even in the non-core fields, the approval as such, it is not automatically happening. We need some approval to be given by the proper officer. So though it says the approval is not required, practically the story is a bit different. So therefore, core fields, what are the core fields? Is like name of the business, legal name, etc. If there is no change in PAN, addition, deletion of shareholders, principal place of business, additional place of business, these are all non-core fields. So non-core fields like name of functionaries, email ID, phone number, etc. This will be automatically changed. There is no need of any approval or rejection by the proper officer. In case of a core information, however, he has to apply for amendment. Proper officer will approve the amendment within the next 15 days. For other changes, that is non-core information, no approval is required by the proper officer. It can be affected by its own by the taxable person on the common portal. If you look at a flow chart of how the amendment has to happen, first, the registered person, let us look at the non-core area first. The registered person, in case of an amendment to be carried out in the non-core areas, he has to file for the amendment. Then the registration certificate is automatically amended. There is no requirement of any approval which is to be given by the proper officer. But with regard to the core areas, he has to submit an application within 15 days of the change. So whenever the change is happening, within 15 days, he will submit the application. This application will be submitted to the GST Common Portal. GST Common Portal again will go to the proper officer, and this proper officer again, he will have two options. He will either grant the permission within next 15 days if he is satisfied with everything. Then obviously the registration certificate will be amended. But if he is not satisfied, if he feels that there is an incomplete, etc., he will serve a show cause notice as to why the amendment should not be rejected. Then within 7 days, the registered person will reply for that. If reply is satisfactory, he will amend the registration certificate. If it is not satisfactory, he will reject the application for amendment of registration. This is the process of the application for amendment of registration for both the core areas and the non-core areas. Then, change in the constitution, you require the fresh registration. Very, very simple. Now, what do you mean by change in constitution? Change in constitution is when a proprietorship firm becomes a partnership firm. A partnership firm becomes a LLP or a private limited company. So in this case, what is happening? The constitution itself is changing. So in this case, when a constitution changes, there is no question of filing of amendment. The entire registration needs to be applied afresh. So therefore, a small example, Varun Enterprise sole proprietorship firm is engaged in supply of electrical goods in Delhi. It is registered under GST. Varun is a proprietor. He wishes to expand the business. And his friend Arun approaches to provide additional capital if he's made partner. Comment on the GST registration applicability. So therefore, in this particular situation, it is very clear that there is a change in constitution. So once there is a change in constitution, Section 28 will not be applicable. Straight away, a fresh registration for a partnership firm has to be required, because it is very simple. The sole proprietorship will be associated with the PAN number of the respective individual. But in case of a partnership firm, a totally new PAN number will come. That is why a fresh GST registration is required. So that was your Section 28 with regard to amendment of registration. Now let me see if there are any queries, so that I am not audible, but everything looks fine here. I thought I was on mute, but I'm not on mute. I'm perfectly fine. Am I still not audible? Please check and let me know, because I can see that the sound is functioning pretty clearly here. So just let me know in case I'm still not audible. I hope I'm audible now, because I can see in my screen that I am audible. Yeah. Please let me know in case I'm still not audible. I'll just check with the technical team. So Section 29 speaks about the cancellation or suspension of registration. So therefore, 29 is how, see, earlier the concept of suspension of registration was not there, but now the concept of suspension also has been brought. So therefore, either the registration can be totally cancelled or it can also be suspended. Suspended meaning cancelled for a temporary period of time till the proper officer is satisfied whether it is to be cancelled or whether it is to be kept active. So 29 speaks about the cancellation or suspension of registration. The proper officer may either on his own motion or an application filed by the registered person or his legal heirs, whoever, in case the person is no more and he has a legal heir, they can cancel the registration in such manner and such period as may be prescribed, having regard to circumstances. So therefore, the proper officer on his own also he can cancel, or an application whenever it is made by the registered person, he can cancel then also. In both the cases, if the cancellation can happen. What are the circumstances due to which the registration is cancelled? The business has been discontinued. The business has been transferred fully for some reason, including the death, amalgamated with another legal entity, demerged or otherwise disposed of. These are the cases where the registration can be cancelled. Where there is a change in constitution of the business. As I told you, if one type of entity is converted to the other type, change in constitution happens. There also the registration can be cancelled. Then the taxable person is no longer liable to be registered under 22 or Section 24. So therefore, no longer liable to be registered means his turnover falls below the threshold. So therefore, there is no question of no need to be registered. Again, provided that during pendency of proceedings relating to cancellation, the registration may be suspended for such period and in such manner as may be prescribed. So whenever the cancellation proceedings are pending, in that case, the registration can be suspended for some time and in such manner as may be prescribed. So these are the circumstances due to which the registration may be cancelled. Now let me see if audio is fine, audible. Thank you very much for the assurance. Nah, because again, if you all have missed anything, it will be my pleasure to again repeat it. Okay. So now we come back to 29 subsection 2. Now, 29 subsection 1, we saw that the voluntarily cancellation, that is in cases where the person will apply for the cancellation on his own whenever there are circumstances which warrant the cancellation. But sometimes the proper officer may also cancel the registration of that person. So in what cases the proper officer will cancel the registration is given in 29 subsection 2. 29 subsection 2 says that the proper officer may cancel the registration from such date, including any retrospective date, that is from previous date also he can cancel, where he feels that the registered person has contravened such provisions of the act or rules made therein. So therefore registered person is there. He has contravened the provisions. That means he has violated the provisions of the GST Act, due to which the officer feels that I will cancel this fellow's registration because he has not complied with the section. So he can go ahead and cancel it. Second case, person paying the tax under section 10 has not furnished the returns for 3 consecutive tax periods. So when I say person paying tax under section 10, I refer to a person opting for the composition levy. So when a person opts for the composition levy, this person has to file a return every quarter, right? Every quarter he has to file the return. So when he says that for 3 consecutive tax period, the composition levy person has not filed the return. That means for 3 quarters, he has not filed the quarterly return which is applicable. That is this point number 2. Point number 3. Every registered person other than a person mentioned above has not furnished the returns for a continuous period of 6 months. Here what is happening? Apart from the composition levy person, a person who is in the regular scheme of registration, he has not filed the returns for continuously 6 months. Right? He has not filed the returns continuously for a period of 6 months. In this case also, the proper officer can go ahead and take the cancellation. Then, a person who has opted for voluntary registration has not commenced business within 6 months from the date of the registration. So, person who is gone for taken the voluntary registration 25 subsection 3 has not commenced the business within 6 months from the date of registration. This exactly is what is given in this section. So therefore, what are the 4 cases where the proper officer can go ahead and cancel the registration? Number 1, contravention of provisions. Contravention of provisions can be anything. If he takes ineligible input tax credit, if he has obtained the GST registration by way of some fraud, willful misstatement, suppression of facts, etc. A second one is composition scheme. 3 consecutive quarters he has not filed the return, his registration may be cancelled. Any regular registered period, for 6 months he has not filed the returns, his registration can be cancelled. Any person who has gone for the voluntary registration, he has not commenced the business within 6 months, his registration also may be cancelled. So these are the cases where the registration may be cancelled, also where the registration has been obtained by way of a fraud, willful misstatement or suppression of facts. Then also the registration can be cancelled. However, opportunity of being heard has to be given to the respective taxpayer. The proper officer cannot cancel the registration without giving the person an opportunity of being heard. Very, very important. Then also during the pendency of the proceedings, he may temporarily suspend the registration till he decides whether the registration is to be cancelled or not. Now, very, very interesting subsection, 29 subsection 3. The cancellation of registration shall not affect the liability of the person to pay the tax and other dues or to discharge any obligation under this act or the rules made thereunder. Now, one person is there. He has not filed the returns properly. He has not collected the GST properly. His registration, proper officer went ahead and cancelled because he has not filed the returns for a consecutive period of 6 months. Just because his registration is cancelled, it does not mean that this person will escape all the liability where he has to pay the tax and other dues. That will continue. The proper officer can issue a notice and continue to recover the dues by that person to the government. So that is a very, very important point which you have to remember. So therefore, liability will not be affected for any period prior to the date of cancellation, whether or not such tax and other dues are determined before or after the date of cancellation. After date of cancellation also, the proper officer may come to know that this person has not paid certain amounts to the respective department, to respective government. In that particular situation also, the proper officer can issue a notice asking him to pay that person amount. So therefore, just because the registration is cancelled, it will not affect the liability of the person to pay the taxes and the other dues. That is given in 29 subsection 3. 29 subsection 4, the cancellation of registration shall be deemed to be under SGST. If it is cancelled under CGST also. So you cannot say, sir, state government officer has cancelled my registration, but CGST fellow has not done anything, so I will continue. It's not possible. State government officer has cancelled your registration means for CGST purpose also your registration is cancelled. That is your 29 subsection 4. Next, 29 subsection 5, very, very interesting point. Now, when your registration is cancelled, at that particular point, you may have some stocks and inputs which are there in semi-finished or finished goods in your stock, or it may also be there in capital goods or plant and machinery. Now, all these inputs you have taken, when you purchase the capital goods or when you purchase the respective material, you have taken all these inputs and it is sitting in your electronic credit ledger. And sometimes you may have utilized the credit, but you may still have the stock which is there. So therefore, here the government says every person whose registration is cancelled shall pay an amount by way of a debit in credit ledger or cash ledger. Electronic credit ledger means when you are taking input tax credit, it will keep accumulating in the electronic credit ledger. When you are adjusting that against your output GST liability, this electronic credit ledger will be debited to that extent. That is the concept of your electronic credit ledger. Electronic cash ledger, as I already told you, it means where you are making a payment of GST in cash. It sits like a wallet and then it offsets by way of the liability. So therefore, every person whose registration is cancelled, he shall pay by way of the debit in the electronic credit or electronic cash ledger equivalent to the credit of input tax in respect of inputs held in stock and semi-finished goods or capital goods or plant and machinery on the day preceding the date of such cancellation, or the output tax payable on such goods, whichever is higher, calculated in the manner as may be prescribed. Means what? Now, when I look at the stocks, the goods and semi-finished goods which are there in my stock, on that, I would have, when I purchased that, I would have claimed the input. So when I'm cancelling the registration, I need to take whatever input tax credit I have taken, or assuming I sell these goods, whatever is the output tax liability. So either input tax credit on such goods or the output tax liability, whichever is higher, I have to pay. This is what is this point with regard to payment in respect of credit of input tax. But with regard to fixed assets and plant and machinery, the situation is slightly different. With regard to fixed assets, it is very simple. You are using the fixed assets for some time. So therefore, whatever input you have taken, asking you to pay the same amount is not fair. So in this particular situation, what happens is, the law says, assume the life of the fixed assets to be 5 years, which is 60 months. So therefore, if you have purchased a fixed asset and claimed the input tax credit, when you are calculating the amount, right, when you are calculating that amount which you have to pay, when your registration is cancelled, you have to take the unused amount of period which is left out. That is the balance useful life of that asset. This balance useful life of that asset I have to take divided by 60 months. 5 months are left out, 5 months by 60 months into input tax credit which has been availed. This is the amount which has to be paid with regard to fixed assets or capital goods. Whereas with regard to stock which is contained in finished or semi-finished goods, it is very simple. Either the input tax credit which is claimed or the output tax payable, whichever is higher. That has to be taken with regard to these particular stocks which is being lying. Some queries. In case of voluntary registration, business not commenced within 6 months, but nil return is being filed from date of registration, but it has not been cancelled by the proper authority. Then there is no problem. See, voluntary registration, if business not been commenced, means is not filing returns also. That is there. Sometimes voluntary registration is there. And see, sometimes what you say also, in rare cases it will happen. You have taken voluntary registration, you are filing nil returns, officer may say you are not doing anything, cancel the registration. In that particular situation, I can convince the officer saying that though I am not doing, no, I want the GST registration for some time, so I'll retain it. So if you are able to convince the officer, then you can retain the GST registration. So therefore, it all depends on how you are able to convince the proper officer in case you want to retain the GST registration. Okay, yeah. So then moving on. So therefore, here, as I told you, in case of capital goods or plant and machinery, the taxable person shall pay an amount equal to ITC, input tax credit, which is reduced by percentage points, which is given on the transaction value of such capital goods, whichever is higher. So either reduce the percentage points or tax on the transaction value, whichever is higher. 29 subsection 6, in the manner as may be prescribed, that amount has to be calculated. Suspension of registration. Once registered person has applied for cancellation or proper officer has decided to cancel his registration, he may suspend his registration during the pendency of the proceedings relating to cancellation of registration. So therefore, I'm applying for the cancellation of registration, or the proper officer has applied to me for the, has told me to that he'll cancel the registration. So till the time the decision is taken, he may keep my registration suspended. Therefore, in that particular situation, if my registration is suspended, I don't need to file the returns, etc. during the pendency of the proceedings. So I am therefore don't need to comply with all these things. Period of suspension of the registration will be as follows. Where the registered person has applied for cancellation, the registration shall be deemed to be suspended from the date of submission of the application or the date from which the cancellation is sought, whichever is later, pending the completion. So he should be suspended from whenever I am submitted the application. When I am submitting the application, in that I have to mention from what date I want to cancel the registration. So if that date is later, then that date has to be taken. In this particular, it will be suspended for that period of time with regard to suspension of registration. Then in case of suspension of registration, where the cancellation of registration has been initiated by the department on its own motion, proper officer has reasons to believe that registration of a person is liable to be cancelled, he may, after giving the person an opportunity of being heard, he may suspend the registration with effect from a date to be determined by him. So therefore, this date will be determined by the proper officer only till he completes the proceedings with regard to cancellation of registration. Whenever a registration has been suspended, that registered person shall not make any taxable supply during the period of suspension. He will not make any supply, very, very important, and shall not be required to furnish any return under Section 39. Section 39 we will cover on Thursday when I take up the topic of returns, wherein we will see the multiple returns. There we'll have more clarity of what are the various types of returns which are required to be filed by the taxpayers. So he will not be required to furnish any return under Section 39. Suspension of registration will be deemed to be revoked upon cancellation of completion of the cancellation proceedings. So when I tell revoke, that means the suspension will be revoked. That means suspension will no longer be there. Either he can cancel the registration totally or he can restore that registration. So therefore, revocation shall be effective from the date on which the suspension has come into effect. Section 30 talks about the term revocation of cancellation of registration. That means where what has happened, where the proper officer on his own motion, that is on his own, if the proper officer has gone ahead and cancelled the GST registration of the taxpayer, this taxpayer may apply to the officer for revocation of cancellation of registration. Say, please revoke my cancellation of registration. That is, you restore my registration. When I say revocation of cancellation, that means it refers to restoration of my registration. So therefore, I can apply to the proper officer for revocation of cancellation of registration within 30 days from date of service of the cancellation order. So therefore, whenever the cancellation order is given, within 30 days from that, I can apply to the proper officer for revocation of the cancellation. Then the proper officer, he may either revoke the cancellation, that is, he will either restore the registration or he may reject the application. But opportunity of being heard shall be given to the respective taxpayer. Revocation of cancellation, as the case may be, again under SGST means it is revocation of cancellation under CGST also. That is another important point which we have to remember. So what are the points where the registration is liable to be cancelled? Circumstances where the registration is cancelled on his own by the proper officer, or when a registered person is applicant, where business is continued, discontinued, where the business is transferred fully, where the business is amalgamated with another legal entity, demerged, change in constitution, or any person who is no longer liable to be registered under 22 or 24. Also, if any person has got the registration by way of fraud, willful misstatement, and suppression of facts, where return filing is not happened in case of composition scheme for 3 consecutive tax period, in case of regular scheme for 6 consecutive tax period, 6 months returns has not been filed. Then also in case of voluntary registration where the business is not commenced. Voluntary cancellation, electronically will submit the application within 30 days of the event occurring warranting the cancellation. Is furnish the application details of the stocks which is held, capital goods which is held, and also whatever payment he has to make. Where a person has submitted an application for cancellation, is no longer liable to be registered, cancellation within 30 days has to be issued, order has to be issued by the proper officer. Then proper officer cancels the registration suo motu. He shall not cancel the same without giving the show cause notice. Opportunity of being heard has to be given. Reply to be submitted within 7 days of the service of the notice. The reply is satisfactory. He will pass an order, and instead of replying, if he served for failure of furnishing continuous period, if he does not file, if he files all the returns, if he makes the payment of all the tax dues, he will drop the proceedings and issue the order. So therefore, these are all the procedures with regard to cancellation of registration. As I already told you, in case of cancellation of registration, whatever input tax credit has been taken on the stock of the inputs and inputs contained in finished goods or capital goods or output tax payable, whichever is higher, is to be taken. When it comes to capital goods, as I told you, 5 years pro rata basis has to be taken into consideration. Rule 44 of the CGST rules, input tax credit chapter, you will see the rules for method of reversal of input tax credit, apportionment and reversal of input tax credit. The same rules there apply here when I am calculating the input tax credit which is required to be paid on the capital goods which are lying whenever I am filing the application for cancellation. So with this, we come to the end of this chapter. Now we shall look at a few questions, and I'll see first if you have any queries. Sir, the amended notes is not available on the portal. Please make them available. I have uploaded it today, Annapurna, so it should be available, because last what I uploaded on 12th June, okay, that was only for the session which happened on 12th June. But with regard to today's session, I've uploaded the presentation myself on 15th June. In case it is still not available, in case you are not able to access it, please check the PDF what I've uploaded today. In case it's not available, please let me know so that I can speak to the technical team and get it uploaded. But rest assured, you will sure get it because I have your email ID also. I will send it directly to your email in case you're not able to access it. Fine. Yeah. So now let's look at some test questions and try to solve some queries. Mahadev Enterprises, a sole proprietorship firm, opened a shopping complex dealing in supply of ready-made garments at multiple locations. That is in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and Tripura in the month of June. It has furnished the following details relating to the supply made at such multiple locations for the month of June. All amounts are excluding GST. Intrastate supply of taxable goods in Himachal 22,50,000. Uttarakhand nothing, Tripura 7 lakhs. Intrastate supply of exempted goods, Himachal nothing, Uttarakhand nothing, Tripura 6 lakhs. Intrastate supply of non-taxable goods, Himachal nothing, Uttarakhand 21 lakhs, Tripura is 40,000. Please make a note of these figures. Now we go to the next page for answering the question. Now, please make a note of these figures because once we go to the next page, you will have it readily accessible with you. With the help of the above mentioned information, answer the following questions giving reasons. Determine whether Mahadev Enterprises is liable to be registered under the GST law and what is the threshold limit of taking the registration in case, assuming it is not required to pay the tax on inward supply. So therefore, Mahadev Enterprises does not have any inward supplies for reverse charge mechanism. If in case it has inward supplies which is subject to reverse charge mechanism, in that particular situation, straight away it has to get itself registered irrespective of the threshold limit. So first question is whether Mahadev Enterprises is liable to be registered. What is the threshold limit for taking the registration? This is the first question. Second one, with reasons you have to explain if your answer will change in the following independent cases. Number one, if Mahadev Enterprises is dealing exclusively in taxable supply of goods only from Himachal Pradesh. That means forget about all the other things. He has only intrastate supply of taxable goods in Himachal Pradesh. But then in case whether it is required. Second one, if Mahadev Enterprises engaged taxable supply of goods and services only from Himachal Pradesh. So Himachal Pradesh, he has taxable goods and services. That is the second question. If Mahadev Enterprise dealing in taxable supply only from Himachal Pradesh and also affected interstate supply of taxable goods other than notified handicraft goods amounting to 4 lakhs. So therefore, in this case, he has taxable supply of goods only from Himachal Pradesh. And apart from that, he also has interstate supplies of taxable goods amounting to 4 lakhs. Please try to answer this question. Please try to answer this question. Yeah, it's not yet available. I'll just recheck because I just checked the PDF upload section in my panel. The last one I'm able to see that the presentation what I've uploaded. I'll just anyways recheck and I'll get it uploaded at the earliest. Waiting for your answers. Good. One answer I've received, which is correct. Also, Praveen, request you to answer for the other cases as well. Praveen has answered till now. So therefore, in this case, we have to calculate the aggregate turnover for Mahadev Enterprises. If you see here, he has 3 states where he has the respective business: Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and Tripura. So in this particular situation, in Himachal Pradesh, if you see, the total turnover comes to 22 lakh 50,000. In Uttarakhand, it comes up to 21 lakhs, because even the non-taxable supply has to be considered when you are defining the aggregate turnover. And in Tripura, if you see, 13 lakh 40,000 is the total amount. So if you see here, when we discussed in the previous session, when a person has the multiple registrations in the multiple states, if one of them is a special category state as per the explanation given to 22 subsection 1, we have to take the turnover limit as per that particular state. So therefore, here in case of Tripura, that turnover limit for the purpose of the exemption is only 10 lakhs. So the moment it crosses 10 lakhs in the case of our Tripura, he needs to get himself registered in the states of Tripura and Himachal Pradesh. But the small twist in this question is, in Uttarakhand, he has only non-taxable supply. In Uttarakhand, he has only non-taxable supply. So therefore, we also read this provision where, in case he has total non-taxable supply from a state, even though he is required to be registered in the state where he has a non-taxable supply, he is not required to be registered. So therefore, for the first question, the answer is he needs to be registered in Tripura and Himachal Pradesh, since the turnover in Tripura is crossing more than 10 lakhs, but he is not liable to be registered since it's not making any taxable supply. Totally is making only non-taxable supply from Uttarakhand. That is the answer to the first question. No, Anirban, about 40 lakh here, if you see, you have to take all the states put together, and aggregate turnover includes everything. And the moment Tripura is there, 10 lakhs is there, so he has to get himself registered. So I hope that is clarification, that point is very clear here. When you're looking at multiple states, you're looking at more than one state, out of which one of the state is a special category state. The turnover limit which is applicable to the special category state has to be considered. So in this case, 10 lakhs is the turnover limit which is applicable to Tripura. Therefore, registration is required. There is no problem. But in Uttarakhand, it is not required because only non-taxable supply is made. If you can see here, Uttarakhand has only non-taxable supply. Non-taxable supply, if it is there and there is no case of exempt or taxable goods, he need not get himself registered in Uttarakhand. But of course, he has to get himself registered in the two other states. Then, if Mahadev Enterprises is dealing exclusively in taxable supply of goods only from Himachal Pradesh, so only from Himachal Pradesh he is engaged in doing the taxable goods. So therefore, you should forget about Tripura, you should forget about Uttarakhand. Look only at Himachal Pradesh. What is the threshold limit of registration for Himachal Pradesh in case of taxable goods? It comes under the 40 lakhs bracket. Please refer the table where I showed the various threshold limits for the various states. So Himachal Pradesh, the threshold limit is 40 lakhs, but the turnover is only 22 lakh 50,000. So he need not get himself registered in this particular case, where he is engaged exclusively in taxable supply of goods. In this particular situation, he need not get himself registered. Now, we go to the second point of this question. In case he is dealing in both, you look at the twist in this question, you will feel that point number 1 and point number 2 is one and the same. But point number 2, if you see, he uses the taxable supply of goods and services also, whereas here it is only goods. Here he uses both goods and services. The moment goods and services both are there, the threshold limit drops from 40 lakhs to 20 lakhs. So therefore, in the second situation where he makes taxable supply of goods and services both, the threshold limit drops to 20 lakhs. And since it is 22 lakh 50,000, he has to get himself registered. That is the answer to the second question. Now, what about the answer to the third question? Request all of you to attempt this. If Mahadev Enterprises is dealing in taxable supply of goods only from Himachal Pradesh, now there is no services, there is only goods. But apart from that, he has also interstate supply of taxable goods other than notified handicraft goods, that is amounting to 4 lakhs. What is the situation for point number 3? Point number 3, waiting for your answers. Yes. So therefore, in the third cases, when in case of interstate supply of goods other than the handicraft goods, straight away registration is required, irrespective of the quantum of aggregate turnover. So therefore, in the third situation, in case of interstate supplies, as per section 24, it requires compulsory registration irrespective of the quantum of aggregate turnover. Therefore, Mahadev Enterprises will be liable for registration. That is the answer to the third question. So therefore, these are very tricky questions which are there with regard to registration, but if you are able to read the questions properly and associate the respective sections to this, it is very easy. Believe me, indirect tax laws is one of the most scoring subjects, and it will continue to remain the same for the next 5 years at least. Because why is a tax subject considered to be difficult? Because of the various case laws and the various judgments and the various circulars and various notifications which are over a period of time built in. When you look at direct tax laws, since direct tax laws is a way older law, you have more case laws and more concepts, more high court decisions, more Supreme Court decisions applicable, and all of that. Whereas in indirect tax laws, believe me, in central excise there were so many case laws. When I studied, central excise was there. So on the concept of manufacture, there were close to 50 to 100 case laws. Can you imagine? Therefore, at that point of time, indirect tax laws was very vast. You had only 40 marks coverage for excise, and you had to study a lot for that. And also for service tax, similarly. But now in GST, since it is a new law, which is only 4 years old, there is quite some time for the case laws to come. And once the case laws start coming in, it will become complicated. So therefore, make use of the newness of the law. And from the exam point of view, it is a very, very scoring subject. So make sure you prepare very well, because the tough subjects in group 2 are costing and direct taxes, and of course the elective subject, of course, is scoring, is what I heard. I'm not sure about that, how it works, but indirect tax laws, you should score a 60 or a 70 comfortably, and it will help you in your other group 2 subjects as well. Now we move on to the second question. LMN Private Limited Coimbatore exclusively manufactures and sells product X, which is exempt from GST, while notifications issued under the relevant GST legislations. The company sells product X only within Tamil Nadu and is not registered under GST. Okay. Further, all the inward supply are taxable under forward charge. Turnover of the company in the previous year was 45 lakhs. Company expects the sale to grow by 30% in the current year. Company purchased additional machinery for manufacturing X on 1st July. On 1st July, additional machinery was purchased. Please make note of the dates very carefully. Purchase of the cap 18%. Effective from 1st November, exemption was withdrawn. So yes, purchased the machinery on 1st July, but exemption was withdrawn from 1st November. GST of 12% started coming. Turnover for half year ended up to 30th September was 45 lakhs. Examine the above scenario and advise LMN Private Limited whether it needs to get registered under GST. If the answer is affirmative, advise as a LMN whether it can avail input tax credit on the additional machinery purchased exclusively for manufacturing X. The second part of the question has a concept from input tax credit. So in case you're familiar with that concept, you'll be able to answer this. Otherwise, I'll just refer to that and try to help you get the answer. But first point, I want you to answer it, because this is totally based on the registration provisions what we have studied. Advise LMN Private Limited whether it needs to get registered under GST. Waiting for your answers. So therefore, in this situation, let me wait for some answers to flow in. So it is not very simple. Some answers are like they don't need the registration, but you will have to look at the facts of the case. Now let us look at the facts of the case here. In this case, exempt products was totally exclusively sold. Okay, exclusively sold again. Now here what is happening? The turnover of the company in the previous year was 45 lakhs. Right, company purchased additional machinery on 1st July. Now if you look at the financial year 1st November onwards, exemption was withdrawn by the central government. So therefore from 1st November onwards, this product became taxable. So the moment this product became taxable, I will have to see what is the aggregate turnover. So in that particular situation, the aggregate turnover is more than 40 lakhs. So here the state is important. Coimbatore is in Tamil Nadu. This general knowledge you should have. Okay, here he has given Tamil Nadu in the question, but it's a different issue. Coimbatore is in Tamil Nadu. That you should remember, because each state has a aggregate turnover which is specified. You need to be very, very careful. So therefore, here it is for Tamil Nadu, it is 40 lakhs. So earlier when it was exempt, even though it was 45 lakhs, it was not required because it was exclusively exempt product. But now exemption is withdrawn with effect from 1st November. The moment exemption is withdrawn with effect from 1st November, it becomes a taxable supply. And since the turnover is more than 40 lakhs, he has to get himself registered under GST. So therefore, the first question, since the exemption is withdrawn for the product and aggregate turnover includes the value of the exempt supply as well, and since it is more than 40 lakhs, he has to get himself, the company has to get itself registered under GST. Second question, this additional machinery was bought at that point of time on 1st July. But at that point, at additional machinery input tax credit was not eligible because he had no registration only. So therefore, he did not have registration at that point of time. So therefore, at that point of time, he will not be eligible for claiming the input tax credit. So therefore, additional machinery exclusively for manufacturing X input tax credit cannot be claimed because at that point of time, the product was exempt, and that point of time, he did not have the registration. So that is the answer for the second question. It can avail ITC on proportionate basis. Once your ITC on proportionate basis will come only in case that respective good was taxable. But in this case, at that point of time, it was exempt. However, in the input tax credit chapter, you'll get more clarity on this. The second part of the question is related to that particular topic. In case I get a chance to talk to you, you can also refer to my previous sessions which are there on YouTube. This was for the May 2021 examinations. You can please refer. I had covered 4 sessions, 4 exhaustive sessions on input tax credit. It is there on YouTube. Still, you'll be able to find it in the same ICAI CA Tube channel. So you can have a look at that, then you'll have some more clarity on the input tax credit as well. Moving forward, next question. Rishabh Enterprises, a sole proprietorship firm, started an air-conditioned restaurant in Virar, Maharashtra in the month of February, where the customers are served cooked food as well as cold drinks or non-alcoholic beverages. In March, the firm opened a liquor shop in Raipur, Uttarakhand for trading of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Determine whether Rishabh Enterprises is liable to be registered under GST with the help of the following information. 1. Serving of cooked foods, cold drinks, non-alcoholic beverages in restaurant in Maharashtra in February 5.5 lakhs, March 6.5 lakhs. Sale of alcoholic liquor for human consumption in Uttarakhand in March is 5 lakhs. Supply of packed food items from restaurant in Maharashtra in February it is 1.5, March it is 2 lakhs. All amounts are excluding GST. Please determine whether Rishabh Enterprises are liable to be registered under GST. Please try to answer this question. Oh, your attempt is on November 22, Vamsi. Very good. So you will have more sessions of input tax credit. Don't worry. But of course, input tax credit, there will be only minor amendments which are there. So you can definitely go through the videos of mine on input tax credit for the May 2021 attempt. And of course, browse through the amendments which is issued by the Board of Studies for the November 2022. I think that should be fine. Yes, waiting for answers for this one. Yeah. So therefore, here what is happening? You have to see when the turnover is crossing the respective turnover, respective amount here. Another important thing you should remember when you are working out this problem is in cooked foods and cold drinks or non-alcoholic beverages in a restaurant. So the moment when I tell restaurant, restaurant refers to supply of service. Okay, restaurant refers to a supply of service which is given in schedule to section 7, the definition of supply. When you see there, 3 schedules are given. Out of that, in one particular schedule, you see that the supply of restaurant service is considered totally to be a service. So this important point you should remember when you are working out the aggregate turnover, because you should not take it as goods, where you have to take it as services. So straight away, one important key takeaway here when you are working out this problem is that in case of services, in the state of Maharashtra, the taxable turnover limit, the threshold limit is rupees 20 lakhs. So therefore, now you'll have to work out the problem. So therefore, in the month of February, 5.5 lakhs for the restaurant services, and packed food items is 1.5 lakhs. So therefore, it is only 7 lakhs in the month of February. But in the month of March, we need to add the total. So 7 lakhs in February plus 6,50,000 plus 5 lakhs. So it comes to 20,50,000. You also have to add the sale of alcoholic liquor, because aggregate turnover includes the exempt supply, and exempt supply includes the non-taxable supply. So therefore, we have to include those particular points as well. And we need to take the total amount. So since the total is more than 20 lakh, since it is 20,50,000, it will be liable for GST. But should it take the registration in Uttarakhand? Again, in Uttarakhand, since it is totally making only non-taxable supply, it need not get itself registered in Uttarakhand. That is the answer for this particular question. So here, the trick here is he gives the query as restaurant services. Immediately, we need to remember that restaurant means it is a service and not supply of goods. So therefore, the turnover limit is 20 and not 40. Right? See, that is the tricky part here. Many of you have answered that as threshold limit of not crossing threshold limit of 20 lakhs. No, but Uttarakhand you have to add. One answer is turnover is not crossing threshold of 20 lakhs. If you add the Uttarakhand turnover, you have to add the non-taxable supply as well for calculation of aggregate turnover. So therefore, we have to increase that one. This thing. Please remember, when you are calculating the aggregate turnover, we have to calculate the non-taxable supply also. Please remember, very, very interesting, important point. Please write it down. When I'm calculating aggregate turnover, I have to take into account the non-taxable supply as well. But if I'm making only non-taxable supply in any one particular state, then I need not take registration in that state. But in the other state where I'm making the regular taxable supply, I have to take the registration. There are no two ways about that one. So I hope this answer also is clear. Now we move on to the next question. AB Private Limited, Pune provides housekeeping services. Company supplies its services exclusively through an e-commerce website owned and managed by High-Tech India Private Limited in Pune. Turnover of AB Private Limited in current financial year is 18 lakhs. Advise AB Private Limited as to whether they are required to obtain GST registration. Will your advice be different if AB Private Limited sells ready-made garments exclusively through the e-commerce website owned and managed by High-Tech India Private Limited? Very, very interesting question. But you'll know the answer only if you have attended last session of PINE, because this one we'll do it last session. Sir, in this case, it can opt for composition levy scheme, which case you are looking for 18 lakhs. See, housekeeping services, 18 lakhs. See, composition scheme, again, it becomes a totally different thing. If you are looking at a composition scheme, there are some restrictions for that. Composition scheme, section 10 gives certain conditions. In that, your e-commerce operator also is there. So it clearly says if you are supplying the goods or services through e-commerce operator, you cannot opt for the composition scheme. So therefore, in this case, if you're asking the doubt with regard to question number 4, no, it cannot opt for the composition scheme. So therefore, in this particular situation, if you remember, we in section number 24, we saw certain categories of persons who are required to compulsory get the registration. So please refer to section 24 when you're answering this question. In that, when it is clearly given, persons who supply through the e-commerce operator who is required to, collect the tax at source, right? Other than what is given in 9 subsection 5. In that particular situation, they have to compulsory get the GST registration. So in this particular situation, in the first case, the housekeeping services are provided through the electronic commerce operator. You have to make an assumption here. You have to assume that the e-commerce operator is required to collect the tax at under section 52. And here the housekeeping services, which is provided by AB Private Limited, is not liable to registration as its turnover is less than 20 lakhs. Please remember in section number 24, which talks about the compulsory registration, only the e-commerce operators, only the suppliers of goods or services through e-commerce operators, other than what is given in 9 subsection 5 is to be considered. But 9 subsection 5 clearly mentions housekeeping services as one of the services. So if your services are covered in the notification given under 9 subsection 5, you will not come in the purview of compulsory registration, which is given in section 24. So therefore, in first situation, since it is less than 20 lakhs, and since it is a service which is given in section 9 subsection 5, which is nothing but the housekeeping services, therefore, here you need not obtain the registration because your turnover is less than the threshold limit. For answering this question, you need to have a knowledge of 9 subsection 5. And you also need to have a knowledge of section 24. Only then you will be able to answer the question. That is the answer to the first part. The second part says, what does the second part say? Second part says that in case ready-made garments exclusively through e-commerce website. So when I talk about ready-made garments exclusively through the e-commerce website, it is definitely not covered under 9 subsection 5. Simple way to memorize what all are covered under 9 subsection 5, as I already told you before, is basically urban company, make my trip, and Ola or Uber. These three are the main services which are covered in 9 subsection 5. So therefore, in case he sells ready-made garments, it's definitely not covered under 9 subsection 5. Therefore, it is covered under section 24 and he has to obtain his registration compulsorily. That is the answer to question number 4. So you need to have a knowledge of 9 subsection 4 and section 24. Only then you will be able to answer this particular question. So first point 9 subsection 5, where it is there, then threshold limit is applicable. 9 subsection 5, it is not there, then threshold limit is not applicable. This point should be very clear, right? Sir, it was for the previous question. What question was that? In case you can opt for the composition scheme. In here, what is happening? He is selling it in Maharashtra and alcoholic liquor for human consumption, Uttarakhand. So section 10, in the case of Maharashtra, he can opt for the composition scheme. No problem. Definitely it can be done. No issue. Because Uttarakhand has only alcoholic liquor for human consumption. So therefore, it is not applicable. So, but section 10 has a lot of variations. So therefore, the straight answer by me cannot be given. You have to look at all the conditions which are satisfied, because for services, composition scheme is different. For goods, it is different. So based on that, you have to take the call. Okay. But for restaurants are specifically covered under the composition scheme, the tax rate being the same at 5%. So the answer to this is yes, it can apply, but some conditions will be fulfilled as per section. You can also go through my video for the charge of GST for the May 2021 attempt. There I've covered composition scheme as well. So that will help you in further understanding the concept of section 10. Now, so I hope this question number 4 was clear. Very, very tricky question, can definitely be expected in the examination. Fifth one, with the help of the following information, in the case of Messrs. Jayant Enterprises, Jaipur, Rajasthan, determine the aggregate turnover for the purpose of registration. Also comment whether GST registration is required. First one, sale of diesel on which VAT is levied by Rajasthan government 1 lakh. Supply of goods after completion of job work from place of Jayant Enterprises directly by the principal by declaring the place of Jayant Enterprises additional place of business 3 lakhs. Export of goods to England, UK 5 lakhs. Supply to its own additional place of business in Rajasthan 5 lakhs. Outward supply of services on which GST is to be paid by recipient and reverse charge 1 lakh. Calculate aggregate turnover. Also comment whether GST registration is required. Deepthi, e-commerce is anyways required to be registered. The question was mainly for the supplier. E-commerce is anyways required to register. E-commerce operator compulsory registration required. Question was mainly with regard to the supplier who is supplying the services through the e-commerce operator. Please try to answer this question. Very, very interesting question. What all is to be considered as the aggregate turnover is what we have to see here. First one, sale of diesel on which VAT is levied by the Rajasthan government. So if Jayant Enterprises is making the sale of diesel, it is a non-taxable supply. Exempt supply includes non-taxable supply. Aggregate turnover, you have to also include exempt supply. So therefore, non-taxable supply also is to be included. So 1 lakh has to be taken for a calculation. Second one, supply of goods after completion of job work from the place of Jayant Enterprises directly by the principal by declaring the place of Jayant Enterprises as additional place of business 3 lakhs. Now here what is happening? Here Jayant Enterprises is the job worker, because after completion of job work from the place of Jayant Enterprises directly by principal. So therefore principal is a different fellow. Principal is declaring Jayant Enterprises place of business as additional place of business supplying. Therefore, this 3 lakhs has to be included in the turnover of the principal and not Jayant Enterprise. So this 3 lakhs won't come into consideration for Jayant Enterprises. Third one, export of goods to England, UK. Export also has to be considered into aggregate turnover. So 5 lakhs has to be taken. So therefore 1 lakh and 5 lakh have to be taken. 3 lakh is to be ignored. So that makes it 6 lakhs. Then supply to its own additional place of business in Rajasthan 5 lakhs. Very, very interesting point. Now, if a person obtains 2 registrations in one state and he is supplying the goods from one registration to other registration, then he has to issue a tax invoice. But in this case, what is happening? He has only one registration, but he has one principal place of business and one additional place of business. So therefore, please remember, he has only one registration. So therefore, he is just transferring the stock from his principal place of business to additional place of business in one registration itself. So therefore, this also is not to be taken as the aggregate turnover because registration is one and the same. So this 5 lakhs also will not come. That is the tricky part in this question. Point number 4. Point number 5, outward supply of services on which GST is to be paid by recipient on reverse charge. This definitely we have to take into consideration. Only inward supply is subject to reverse charge, should not be taken in aggregate turnover. Outward supply subject to reverse charge, very much to be taken 1 lakh. So 1 lakh plus 5 lakhs, 6 lakhs plus 1 lakh. So totally 7 lakhs is the aggregate turnover. This is the answer for this. Right? So therefore, as expected, point number 4 has foxed everyone and everyone has got 12 lakhs. It's very, very easy to be foxed because he's telling supply to additional place of business. He is not telling supply to another registration within the same state. If he had 2 registrations and from one registration is supplying to the other registration, then this has to be included in aggregate turnover. But in this case, he has only one registration. From his principal place of business, he's sending to additional place of business. So there is the question of to be taken as the respective aggregate turnover. So therefore, this 5 lakhs will not come. So 7 lakhs is the turnover on and not 12 lakhs. Sir, petrol diesel is outside purview of GST. Why 1 lakh is to be added for a calculation of aggregate turnover? Because Anirban, the definition of aggregate turnover mentions exempt supply. And exempt supply includes non-taxable supply also. So therefore, for the purpose of calculation of turnover, it has to be added. It is outside the purview of GST, but added to the total turnover. Since it is outside the purview of GST, you are not collecting GST on that. Or if you are exclusively engaged in non-taxable supply in some other state, you need not get the registration because it is outside the purview of GST. But when calculating aggregate turnover, it is very much taken into consideration. One more thing, whether liable for registration, another tricky part. If on the face of it, you feel it is less than 20 lakhs, so therefore registration not required. Important point number 3, export of goods to England, UK. So therefore he is into interstate supply. Export of goods is nothing but interstate supply. It is a sale outside the state. So therefore export of goods to England is an interstate supply. When there is an interstate supply, other than the notified handicraft goods or whatever, there is no question of any threshold limit. Therefore, he has to get himself registered under GST. 100% similar question can be expected in the examination. Very, very tricky, wherein 2 things are hidden in the respective questions. Now, let us look at some MCQs. Can a person without GST registration claim ITC and collect the tax? No. Yes, only if he is located in special category states, only with the prior permission of the central government. Please answer one and then you give the answer so that I know for which question you are giving the answer. So therefore, if he sends his goods to another state, is that included in aggregate supply? Yes, very much, because the moment he sends it to the other state, that means he has a registration in the other state also. So therefore, very much the registration is, it will be taken in the aggregate term. So for the first question, he cannot claim the ITC and collect the tax because he does not have the GST registration. Only if you have a GST registration, you have the authority to collect the tax and claim the input tax credit. Second one, in case where a person makes supplies from multiple states and his aggregate turnover exceeds the threshold limit, he has to get registered in all the states, in only one state where turnover is greater than 20 lakhs, in states where turnover is greater than 20 lakhs, in any one of the states. Please try to answer this one. Yeah. Second question. If he makes supplies from multiple state, aggregate turnover exceeds the threshold limit, he has to get registered. Of course, because if he makes supplies from multiple states, he has to get there. He has to get registered in all the states. Only if he has any business, only exclusive non-taxable supply in one state, for that state he'll get an exemption, but that is not mentioned in the problem. The problem says if he makes supply in the multiple states, aggregate turnover exceeds the threshold limit, he has to get registered in all of the states. So answer for question number 2 is A. Third one, in case of job worker, once the work is completed, the value of the goods shall be included in the turnover of principal, turnover of job worker, agent, none of the above. Question number 3. For the second question here, I am getting answers saying B and C. Please don't get confused. In case he makes supplies from multiple states and his aggregate turnover exceeds the threshold limit, it is very, very simple. He has to get registered in all the states, right? Nowhere in the question he has mentioned regarding non-taxable supply or anything, there is no scope for any confusion. So straight away it is 2A is the answer for the second one. Therefore, for the third one, once the work is completed by the job worker, the goods value also should be included in the turnover of the principal, because the job worker is only concerned with the job work which is done. So therefore, in his turnover, the value of the service will be included, but the value of the goods will be included in the turnover of the principal. So the answer for the 3 is also A. Fourth one, Mr. Jeetram, an agriculturist located in state of UP, is a reseller of agricultural produce. His turnover for the period July 20 to March 21 is 20 lakhs. He has made occasional interstate taxable supplies up to 10 lakhs of handicraft goods to state of Jammu and Kashmir during the month of March 21. State whether he is liable for registration under the Act or not. Very interesting question. So here is Ijitram is located on UP. He has the turnover of rupees 20 lakhs, which is there. Interstate taxable supplies of 10 lakhs of handicraft goods is there. So when he makes the supply of notified handicraft goods, straight away threshold limit will be applicable. Straight threshold limit will be applicable. But what is the threshold limit? That is an interesting point here. Here he has 20 lakhs worth exempt supply because he's a reseller of agricultural produce, and 10 lakhs worth taxable supply. So therefore, aggregate turnover is 30 lakhs. Please remember, in case of interstate taxable supplies of notified handicraft goods, when you are calculating the aggregate turnover, this 40 lakhs limit will not be applicable. 40 lakhs limit is only for intrastate taxable supplies of goods and not for the interstate one. So the moment interstate of handicrafts is applicable, your straight away regular normal 20 lakhs only will be applicable. So therefore, in this case, aggregate turnover is 20 lakhs plus 10 lakhs. So therefore, he is liable for registration. So the answer for fourth also is A. That is, he'll be liable for the registration. I'm very, very, very happy that most of you have got the answer for the third one. The third one is correct. Yes. Fourth one also is a very, very tricky question. We'll immediately think Uttar Pradesh is 40 lakhs, but the turnover limit is 30 lakhs. Notified handicraft goods registration not required. No. In case of interstate supply of notified goods, threshold limit is applicable, but threshold limit of 40 lakhs is not applicable. 20 lakhs only is applicable. Right? 40 lakhs means only intrastate supplies of goods for those states only we have to consider. Interstate supply threshold limit is always 20 lakhs. So with this, we come to the end of our topic on the discussion on the chapter regarding registration. I hope all of you are now familiar with the various concepts, that is 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30 of the CGST Act 2017, along with the various notifications and the respective clarifications which are given. Please revise this. Let me just recheck whether the presentation is uploaded, because I remember uploaded, but some of you are saying that you've not received it. I'll just check that and get it uploaded as well. Don't worry about that. So please revise. Please work out more issues. I'll be sending you more test questions via I'll upload it, and you please work out all of those also. And please let me know in case of any queries. Now we will meet again on Thursday at 6 p.m. This is to discuss the chapter on returns in GST. So Thursday and Saturday, we'll have the discussion on the returns subject. Meanwhile, any queries before we wind up for the day? Not yet. So any queries which I've in case missed out today, I think I've pretty much covered all the queries. In case I've missed out any queries, please make a note of them and let me know the same when we meet again on Thursday. So thank you very much. Good night. Stay safe, everyone, and take adequate precautions and study well for your examination. See you on Thursday. Thank you. Good night.